Welcome everybody, welcome. It's so good to see you. As you can see, we're a little bit more chill today. We will be reading a novel, actually my novel, as you can see right down here. This is my novel called Balk. If you guys want to read along through the ebook version, you guys can purchase that on Amazon right now, and it should be immediately available. If you guys want to help support me and read along, then I highly recommend you do that. This is my novel right here. Isn't it beautiful? I love it. So yes, that is that. This book also has illustrations in it, black and white illustrations. So I will be showing you guys the black and white illustrations when we get to them in the book. So that way you guys can enjoy that part of it as well. So here's the back of the book. So it reads, Kishka Omochi is an 18-year-old high school student who can't seem to decide what he wants to do with his life. Well, baking is his ultimate passion. His family doesn't seem to agree. Despite juggling the care of his younger brother, attending school, and working a part-time job, everything in Kishka's life seemed to be going well until he got to know a girl by the name of Pudopi Kikamura. Suddenly, his life changed drastically. Who were these new people he called friends? Why didn't his parents understand him? Would he end up hurting the people he truly cared about? In a story about self-reflection and testing one's strength, join Kishka Omochi as he faces the hurdles of life and discovers what it's like to have friends and learn how to be one himself. Chapter 1. Watching and Listening. It was raining again. It always seemed to be doing that lately. Raining, that is. And if it wasn't raining, it was just plain cold out. It was really unpleasant. What made it more unpleasant, though, was the fact that I wasn't alone in that wretched weather. My younger brother, Riduna, was also forced to be out in it. He held my right hand tightly, shivering as the raindrops fell against his cheeks. He looked up at me rather pitifully and held my gaze. "Kishka, I'm really cold," he complained, shutting his left eye as a drop of water slid near it. His free hand rose to rub the drop away, dropping his hand back down to his side shortly afterwards and continuing to look my way. "I know, but we're almost home," I spoke back to him in my regular flat tone, looking to him and then back in front of me. At that moment, we were waiting at a crosswalk on our way home from school. I stared at the red crosswalk light, waiting impatiently for it to turn to the bright green man graphic instead. The two of us had left Reedness School not long ago, and even though the dark sky said otherwise, it was only just then approaching the evening. I fortunately did not have work that day, but the following day I did. By all the talk at school about the weather, it was going to be another cold one. I sighed. I really wished I could get a car. The cold days were starting to take a toll on me. I was sure Reedna felt similarly. The crosswalk's light changed, the two of us starting up our stroll once more. With my scarf pulled up to my nose and my hood pulled up over my head, I began my walk across the street and stared at the vehicles passing beside us. I might have looked a little shady with how I was dressed and the way I stared blankly at the road, but I didn't care. I wanted to be on the lookout for any idiots driving. You never knew when some driver wasn't paying attention, you know. Once we were on the other side of the street, I tore my attention back to the sidewalk in front of us and then back to my brother. My brother had bright orange hair with a slight weave to it. It was short, but at the moment, it was kind of hard to tell with his scarf pulled all the way up to his face. Clearly, he wasn't a fan of the cold either. Reedna's build was small and slender, not much baby fat left over, but since he was 12, no one would expect it anyway. He was average height for his age and was also very outgoing. Basically, he was similar to the way I looked, but took after my mother in personality, because he certainly didn't get it from my father. If anyone looked at the two of us, even from afar, it was always obvious Reedna and I were related, though. Having bright red locks of hair wasn't that common in Japan after all. As for how I looked, my hair was a similar shade of red, though a bit longer than my brother's, with more of a wave. It curled up at the sides and flared out a bit when it hit my neck. It was a pretty easy look to maintain, and I could even get away with not brushing my hair every morning if I was careful. I had a pretty frail appearance, not going to lie. I was very slender, and you could clearly see several bones in my body making an appearance under my lightly colored skin. It wasn't that I was underweight. I just had a high metabolism and didn't gain any fat. I didn't see it as any problem, though, despite what others may think. Though, I wouldn't mind having a little extra body fat to protect me from this weather.
Do you think we could have hot chocolate or something when we get home?
My brother mumbled sheepishly. At a glance, it would seem silly as to why he seemed apprehensive in asking such a simple question, but I knew what he meant. You see, I did a fair bit of baking and cooking at home, and for some reason, my brother found it embarrassing to ask me to fix things up for him, despite me assuring him that it was no problem. But, a mumbler or not, I'd happily fill his request. Sure, we still have some bunny rabbit marshmallows left, so we can use those too before they grow stale, I told him, bringing my gaze back to the path in front of us, since he was too shy to look me in the eyes at that point. I've actually been meaning to try out a few new recipes I have, so it works out, I guess. Reedna's body language then changed, so much so that I could tell he was grinning beneath his own scarf, despite the fact it was wrapped tightly over his mouth. Because of this, I found myself smiling too, but said nothing else, and just continued to walk the rest of the way home. Soon enough, we were at our destination, and let ourselves inside, locking the door tightly behind us. We entered the quiet home, only the sound of our heating units running to greet our ears. Removing our shoes at the door, we then made our way to the kitchen, which was to the left and down the hall. Reedna took a seat at one of the bar stools and sat upon our kitchen counter, elbows propped up on it. I moved around to the other side of the counter and started pulling ingredients out from our cupboards. Oh yeah, when I said that I cooked and baked, I didn't mean I just did it every once in a while. I did it. A lot. It was something I picked up when I was younger, and I guess I could say I had a passion for it. It relaxed me, but at the same time made me feel excited. If you saw my general demeanor, me saying this would probably surprise you though. I didn't often express my emotions physically, so most didn't key this sort of behavior to me at all. I don't know. I guess I was just strange or something. Either way, it helped me in terms of getting a job, seeing as I baked at a local cafe, so that was nice. I started to prep the homemade hot chocolate, grabbing sugar, dark chocolate, milk, cream, and vanilla extract. I mixed together all the dry ingredients as the water I set in a pan on the stove began to boil. Once ready, I placed a glass bowl containing the chocolate just over the boiling water, stirring the steadily melting candy. I had another pot on the stove that had milk in it, which was almost hot enough by the time the chocolate was melted. It already smelled good. I usually tried my best to avoid using pre-made items in my cooking because they didn't taste as good and could be expensive. In addition to that, I preferred to just make things from scratch when I could. Of course, I still had to go out to buy ingredients that I couldn't make from my own home easily, but that was to be expected. After I mixed all the dry and liquid ingredients together, I started my next project while waiting for it to cool. It was time to make some warm brownies for Reedna and I. I had to keep the two of us warm and happy some way, right? Especially after that cold walk in the rain. I continued to multitask for a little while until all that was left to think about was the brownies and the timer I'd set for them. I handed a mug full of warm hot chocolate to Reedna, watching him happily take sips of it and slurp up each little marshmallow bunny into his mouth.
Thanks, Kishka,
he sang happily. His hand then reached for our kitchen's television remote, which sat on the same counter as him. As he did so, his eyes looked to mine, his hand getting closer and closer to the device, but never daring to break eye contact with me. That was his way of asking permission to watch some TV, more or less. With a soft roll of my eyes, I nodded and took a sip of my own hot chocolate, which contained significantly less sugar fluffs. Reedna beamed and immediately turned on the television, using the remote to bring up his favorite channel. It was playing some childish cartoon he liked. I smiled ever so slightly at his happiness and just continued to stand in the kitchen, awaiting the timer to go off. Just a few more minutes. Eventually, I walked over to one of the countertops and leaned against it, setting my elbows upon the ceramic. I was tired. I kept trying to blame my exhaustion on the weather, but I was pretty sure it all stemmed from my lack of sleep and how the school year felt like it was coming to an end so rapidly. There was a lot of planning I still had to do in terms of furthering my education at a university, and I tried not to think about it too much while I was at home. But then I was forced to listen to the voice in my head that kept saying, If you don't think about it now, when will you? And it had a good point. I didn't have time to think about that sort of stuff while I was at school, and I couldn't think about it while I was at work either. But, oh well. I'd figure it out. I let out a sigh as I breathed out and arose from the counter just in time to hear the timer go off. Flipping off the device, I turned off the oven and reached for an oven mitt. Without delay, I took out the hot delicacies out of the oven and placed them atop the stove, letting them cool. Some time passed as we waited for the brownies to cool, and I eventually sat myself next to my brother, spacing off while watching the television screen and getting used to the sound of its hum before a new sound met my ears. It was the sound of the front door knob wiggling, which meant our father was home from work. My brother did not react more than a blink, his attention fixated on the screen in front of him. Figures. I, however, had decided to rise from my seat next to him to greet our respected adult. My father worked a lot. He left early in the morning before my mother, while Reedna and I got ready for school. Then he worked all day and came home late, so we didn't really see a lot of him. Even when he was home, it seemed he always had things to do. "Welcome home," I greeted him in my usual tone, raising my hand as I did so. The red-headed man nodded in response, slipping his shoes off at the doorway and setting his briefcase against the wall. A faint smile tinted his lips as he walked over to us. "Thanks. How are my boys doing?" Our father walked into the kitchen, eyeing the two of us and the screen that occupied my brother's attention. Finally snapping his eyes away from the television, Reedna turned to face his dad and smiled.
Welcome home, Dad.
The younger one grinned, opening his arms as the parent approached him for an embrace. "How was school?" The typical conversation started, all pretty much the same as the day before, but with different answers from the young, more creative one. There's no point in me talking about it, though. If you'd like an idea, I'd suggest picking up nearly any other book, and you'll see an exchange equal to the one happening here. While they conversed, I walked back into the kitchen and made myself busy by cleaning the dishes we dirtied earlier with our snacks. There were still some brownies left over, so I made sure to place them on a plate and cover it with a wrap to keep it fresh. They'd probably be gone in a day or two with how this family ate. The quiet hum of the television echoed in the room, no one paying much mind to it, especially once Reedna had begun to talk to our father about his schoolwork and so on. Reedna was pretty smart, smarter than I was at that age. I can tell you that much. He was pretty empowered by his knack with grades, striving to do better and more the next time around, which was pretty good, I guess. Our parents loved it too. After all, with them working all the time, they didn't have to worry about whether or not one of their kids were failing their classes. My brother really did make them happy. The two eventually left the kitchen in the middle of me cleaning dishes, which left my mind to wander a bit. I'd apparently let it wander a little too long, though, since the next sound that caught my attention was the sound of my mother coming in through the front door. It was that late already? Turning around to confirm my disbelief, I found that it was, in fact, 8 o'clock. My eyes drifted down to my hands, which looked all weird and wrinkly for having been in the dishwater for so long. Blinking, I finally took them out and dried them to the best of my ability with a nearby hand towel before draining the soapy water from the sink. We had a dishwasher, but I usually preferred to clean them by hand. I found it to be a nice chore and to let me relax in the warm activity. I definitely preferred it over other chores. I'm gonna take a drink of water. My mother walked into the kitchen, smiling when she saw me. Hold on. "Hey, sweetie," she said, tucking some of her long brunette locks behind her ear and setting her purse up on the counter. "How was school? I think I heard your father with Reedna upstairs, yeah?" she asked, rummaging through in her bag for something. Yeah, it was all right," I said in response, inspecting how she looked. It must have stopped raining while we were inside, or so I assumed, since my mother looked every speck of dry. "I forgot to prepare something for dinner, but there... Oh. Sorry, wrong character. I forgot to prepare something for dinner, but there's stuff in the fridge from the other night, so you can help yourself to that," I informed my parent. I got so wrapped up in baking and cleaning, it completely slipped my mind. Oops. All right, that works then. I need to go email my boss something first, though. Just on my way home, I remembered something kind of important, and you know me and my memory. If I don't email it to him when I'll remember, I'll forget it and regret it. A small laugh came from my mother as she spilled out her thoughts. She then kept her hands on her hips and grinned at me. Anyway, if you need me, I'll be in my office, okay? And with that, she grabbed her purse and down the hall and into her office she went. It was probably the last time I'd see her that night, to be honest. She shut herself in there a lot, for work or maybe just to get some time alone. I wasn't sure, but I guess it didn't concern me too much after all. I didn't need anything from her right then, so it wasn't a big deal. With a deep breath, I reached into the fridge and took out a container of soup I'd made a couple days prior. It was late and I hadn't worked on my homework at all yet. I was going to get cruddy sleep again. The next day was a bit overcast. That and the air was chilled and thin. Nothing I couldn't handle, but nothing that was ideal to me since I walked to work after school. My whole day felt like a blur. I didn't get to sleep until about 1 a.m. the night before, and after waking up at 6, I was already ready to go home and crash. However, I had a job to attend to, and couldn't just ignore it, you know? When I arrived, the cafe was busy as usual, the customers buzzing with excitement, and the waitresses walking about from table to table, whether it to be greeting their customers or delivering them their food. It was a pleasant environment, many said. I had to agree that it gave a nice happy feel, but nothing compared to how it was in the back, in my opinion. Once I went into the break room, I opened my locker and threw my scarf inside, along with my wallet and keys. My backpack was too large to fit in my locker, so it hung on the coat rack along with my coat next to the lockers. Next was changing into my uniform, which I promptly did in the employee bathroom, making haste so that I was on time when clocking into my shift. I'd never been late and intended on keeping that record. Upon entering the kitchen, the familiar carb-filled aroma hit my senses, and a faint smile appeared upon my usual blank lips. This is where I belong. Waving at the last bakery chef there, I alerted him that he was free to go and watched him bow before leaving shortly afterwards. It was already busy in the kitchen, so it wasn't but a few moments before I was slapped with several orders, leaving me seemingly little time to prepare them and get them out. However, I wasn't the least bit stressed. I was used to that sort of business, and when I wasn't sure we had all the ingredients as we should, and when I was sure we had all the ingredients as we should, I started my work. Recipes I knew by heart came spraying into each mixer, the electric one doing the hard work while I took it upon myself to hand mix what I felt I could. After all, leaving the machine to do all the work took out all the fun of it. Whipping and tossing, I prepared a few crepes and took out the piping bag, cream cheese icing filling the inside. When a single crepe sheet was done, I flipped it off the pan and onto the plate, pouring the next tablespoon of batter onto the warm cookware before going back to the finished one. Squeezing the sweet-filled bag, I put a generous amount inside the pastry treat, and then reached for the bowl of strawberries that had been soaked in sugar and strawberry syrup overnight, as per routine. Using a spoon, I scooped some out and let some dribble inside the treat before folding it closed with my gloved hand and pouring more on top. By then, the next grape batter had finished cooking, and I repeated the process again, watching my vision come to life. After sprinkling some powdered sugar on top, it was ready to go out, and I placed it in its designated area, tapping the nearby bell to alert the waitresses of their finished order. Next was a blueberry biscuit with butter and blueberry jam on the side. I took out the tub that the previous bakery chef had prepared of the dough and plopped a plentiful amount on a coated oven tray, placing it in the preheated oven and working on the next dish as it baked. Some of the chefs liked to talk to one another while working, but I didn't do that. I responded when I was being spoken to, otherwise I received my orders and did them as needed without a peep. I guess it worked out that constant socialization in the back wasn't required or expected at my workplace. I preferred it that way. After all, it helped prevent drama. Oh, and the fact that we had a small number of staff probably helped too. The cafe only had 1 or 2 cooks that prepared dishes that weren't handled by the bakery, and it was the same for the bakery side as well. We also had 1 person that prepared specialty drinks. One number of staff was pretty low, but the workplace felt spacious because of it. Our number of staff was pretty low, but the workplace felt spacious because of it, even if it did get a little busy, with only 1 person making made-to-order items. We had no more than 3 waitresses on the floor at once, and of course our boss, or a person of similar authority, was on duty at all times. The store owner, my boss, was there a majority of the time and was attentive to all our needs. The cafe was a relaxed and friendly establishment despite it being a busy one, and ultimately the bottom line was that everyone got along, so it worked. I was happy to work there. Time passed quickly, as usual, and when business started to slow down, I was able to take my time with the new pastry orders, doing as much by hand as I could. With each flip of the wrist, my creations became something I loved, and no matter how strange it may have sounded, creating something from scratch truly filled me with happiness. Whenever I could, I'd fit in a break or at least take a moment to drink some water, and when I did, I'd sit against the wall, just off of the hallway that led out to the main cafe floor, just so I could listen to what our customers had to say about my pastries. A majority of the time, the reactions came from girls around my age, humming or squealing in happiness at the taste. They often said things like, "delicious," "so sweet," or even, "this is like heaven." The words of praise, even if they weren't being directed at me on purpose, brought me joy. I couldn't stop the smile spreading across my usual blank lips, feeling my chest swell with happiness. Needless to say, I loved hearing those things. While the smile didn't leave my face for the rest of my shift, when it was time to close up for the night, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. That was it for today. All my coworkers thanked each other for another successful day at work, and then we slowly began to take our depart into the cold winter night. Ugh. As I stepped into the cold, backpack strapped against me tightly and the scarf wrapped around my neck, I realized I'd forgotten my hat at school. Was all I voiced, my face morphing to a deeper frown before I sighed and proceeded to take a step in the direction of my home. It was unfortunate, but there was nothing I could do about it right that moment. I started my walk, hands stuffed in my pockets to my coat. As I walked, my sleepiness started to catch back up with me. Oh right, I was really exhausted before, wasn't I? My feet trudged along the cold, wet streets, eyes watching somewhat aimlessly in front of me. With each step I took, I struggled focusing on anything that wasn't my exhaustion. It felt like it was taking over. Come on, Kishka, you can crash when you get home. Tomorrow's the weekend, and you can do whatever homework you need to get done after you get up, and... My eyelids started to feel heavy, each blink seeming to last longer than the last. The snippets of comforting dark I'd get behind my eyelids was so tempting. Sleep sounded so good right then. If only I could just sleep right here, right... Wham! Suddenly, I was shoved harshly at my left side, nearly losing my footing entirely. My eyes shot wide open as I stumbled, hands scrambling to get out of my pockets in case I needed to catch myself. I reacted vocally as I regained my footing and looked back in the direction of where I was shoved. To my left stood another man, who quickly approached me. Despite how quickly he was to close our distance, his expression was one of caution and worry. He was even mumbling curses under his breath, looking almost as startled as I was. "Oh shit, I didn't mean to run right into you, man," the man defended. He reached out and grabbed my left shoulder. "I didn't hurt you, did I? I swear, if you would have fell over, I would have felt terrible." The man seemed to be mostly talking to himself at that point, so I just stared back at him, wordless and expressionless. He didn't seem to mind, though, caught up in his own thoughts, which gave me time to really grasp who stood in front of me. Though it was dark out and hard to make out the details of most things at the hour, it was abundantly clear that the way the guy was dressed was abnormal. The man had short dark hair, side swept bangs with side bangs that hugged his jawline. Below that was his mostly bare torso, which was what caught my attention the most. The dark-haired man looked fit, like he worked out frequently. He had a nice pair of pecs, which you could clearly see through his tight-fitting tank top, and seemingly not an ounce of fat. At least, not that I could make out in the night lighting. But anyway, a tank top in this kind of weather? The concept made me furrow my brows, bewildered by how he could be so comfortable dressed as he was. Well, he also had on a pair of sweats. But even then, they were only sweats. While I was covered from head to toe in clothing. Well, minus the head. When the man didn't hear me respond to his million questions he threw my way, he too ceased talking and narrowed his eyes with a worried smile. "Hello?" he inquired. Right, I should respond. "Okay, now this chapter has a picture, So I'm going to show the picture on screen if you guys would like to see. Oops, that's the wrong button. This is a picture from this one. So I will have it up until the end of this page so you guys can see. Okay, I'm going to continue now. Ow, I grumbled, my right hand raised to slowly push his hand off of my left shoulder. That hurt. My voice remained flat, only my eyes showing my emotions. I narrowed them, not hiding my clear irritancy. All things considered, if that random guy hadn't ran into me, I might have fallen asleep and fell over on my own. But he was the one who ran into me after all, so I wasn't going to let my inner monologue convince me that he wasn't at fault still. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not used to seeing others on the street around this time, so I really wasn't paying attention at all. He laughed, seeming to not show too much concern for me now that I was talking, which made me scowl a little behind my scarf. Anyway, you're okay, right? I want to go home. Yeah, I'm fine, I mumbled, holding back the urge to say something snarky. Why are you dressed like that? I changed the topic because my curiosity got the best of me. I had to at least ask this. I raised up my left hand, pointing at the man's torso. You do realize it's winter, right? My expression softened to my usual stare, despite being puzzled with the strange man. You know, with all the commotion, I hope he didn't steal my wallet or anything. I quickly checked my pockets. Okay, it's still there. Oh? He reacted to my question, blinked a few times, and then relaxed his stance by smiling while he placed his hands on his hips confidently. Well, I get too odd if I run around this place in a long shirt and stuff, and it's a bit too cold and a bit obscene to walk around without a shirt on at all, if you ask me, so I chose the next best thing. The man spoke with a big, goofy grin, simply amused with himself. I continued to stare at him, even more puzzled than before. People are weird. Okay, it's the next page, so I'm gonna get rid of the drawing now. Goodbye. Okay. Right. Well, I'm gonna go then, I mumbled. I didn't want to waste any more time with him. I was still several minutes away from my home, and it certainly wasn't getting any warmer outside. The longer I stood there talking to the weirder, the colder and more irritable I got. Have fun, I grumbled just above a whisper, taking a step around the man and moving forward. The man only nodded at me and waved. Okay, take care, man. The strange one yelled back at me, and without a moment's hesitation, he ran off down the street and was quickly out of sight. I sighed. All in all, I guess it wasn't a terrible thing that he'd ran into me. I didn't feel tired anymore. In fact, the whole situation kept me alert the entire way back, mostly because I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I got home, however, both my body and mind was ready to call it quits. It was like it knew sleep was close. Despite how late it was, my father was up when I got home, watching some television while his laptop laid in his lap. He glanced at me when I entered the house, his office off to the right of the front door. He smiled briefly before bringing his attention back to his show. A typical evening. I removed my shoes and lugged myself into my bedroom, which was just up the stairs. Once inside, door shut, I let my backpack roll off my arms and onto the floor, letting a small thump noise accompany it. I ripped off my scarf and jacket and let my body fall into my bed, my mind taking advantage of the sweet, relaxing aura in the room. Home sweet home. Bzz, bzz, bzz. My alarm sounded, alerting me that it was late and time to get up. I groaned and reached for my cellular device, which voiced my alarm. The noise continued to sound annoyingly until I sat up and yanked it off my side table. Yeah, I spoke to it, as if it would hear it. I turned off the alarm with a swipe of my finger and yawned. I laid back in my bed, arms out to either side of me, and stared at the ceiling. I was off work that day, mercilessly enough, which meant I would be able to go to the store and get items to make dinner without having to rush around. Unfortunately, it was the weekend, which meant that I would be without my hat for a few more days. Maybe the weather would be nice. I hope so. Lifting up my phone and above my face, I used my other hand to swipe across the screen and bring up the weather app. Of course. As my luck would have it, the temperature was even lower than the past few days. I really wished I had a car. Sitting up in my bed, I forced myself to get started with my day, whether I wanted to or not. I slid the covers off my body and swung my legs off the side of the bed, slipping my feet into some slippers I had laid there. I proceeded to leave my bedroom, heading down the stairs into the colder lower level. When I reached the bottom, I saw my mother was awake and inside the kitchen. "Good morning," she smiled my way. I pushed some of my messy bedhead hair away from my eyes and nodded in reply. "Good morning." I walked further into the kitchen, immediately taking note of its emptiness. That was weird. Usually Rita was up by then. My mother must have taken notice of my confusion, as she immediately spoke up. "Rita went to a friend's house this morning," she said, as she straightened up some papers at the dinner table. Looked like it was something to do with work, as usual. "Oh," I said. "I guess that explained that." "Yeah, they'll drop him off sometime later tonight," my mother told me, as I tiredly scratched the back of my neck. "All right, I guess I'll only pick up enough for the three of us for dinner tonight then," I replied, passing by her to get to the refrigerator. At that, my mother immediately hesitated. I knew what that meant. "Actually," she spoke up sheepishly, "your father and I were going to go out tonight. We have another business meeting, and we'll be gone pretty late," she explained, grabbing my right shoulder and squeezing it slightly. It was supposed to be comforting, but the gesture wasn't a familiar one. "But I'm going to leave some money here so you can make whatever you feel like tonight, okay? We can eat together tomorrow night as long as nothing comes up." This always happened. By that, I meant when I said that they work all the time, they seriously work all the time. Even on their days off, they ended up needing to go out and do more work-related tasks. I would say I was disappointed, but in all honesty, I was just used to it. "Oh, all right, I'll do that then," I told her with a nod, not bothering to smile back, but giving her a little eye contact before looking back to the kitchen. I grabbed the milk and eggs from the refrigerator, setting them out on the counter. My mother said nothing more other than an apologetic, "Thank you, Kishka," followed by a hug, and then off she went, down the hall with a cup of coffee. I shrugged. Pulling out some cinnamon, sugar, and flour, I started to fix up a sweet breakfast coffee cake. I also brought out some bacon to fry. I took my time making my breakfast, listening to the hum of the kitchen fan and the popping of the fatty pig meat on the stove, it working as my therapeutic soundtrack. After I finished preparing and eating my breakfast, I returned upstairs and took a shower, brushed my teeth, untangled my hair, and put on one of my warm button-ups and a jacket. Since I was going to be alone all day, I decided I might as well get the shopping done first. Then I could relax and study as I saw fit for the remainder of the day. Nothing really phenomenal happened the rest of the day. I went shopping, walked home through the cold, made food, studied, made dessert, studied, wasted time on my computer for a few hours, studied, and then wished my brother good night after he came home. It was a full day. It wasn't until I'd started settling in my sheets that I'd heard my parents return home through our front door that night. It seemed they had a full day as well. Judging by the time and the noise they made, though, my mother was probably drunk again. But it was none of my business. She had my father with her, and I had nothing to do with it. I rolled over and shut my eyes. As soon as the racket died down, I drifted to sleep. The next morning was a familiar routine as usual, waking up, making breakfast, and making sure my brother didn't sleep in too late. It was the weekend, so there wasn't much on the agenda, but I looked forward to not having to work or run errands that day. As for breakfast, I decided to make a meatier meal instead of my regular sweet one, frying up some spiced sausage along with eggs cooked in the meaty grease. Once completed, I set out a plate for Rita and a plate for myself, packaging up the leftovers for my parents once they woke up. My little brother was watching a movie on the television screen, looking away from it in small bursts to grab and eat some of his food. I smiled at his childish demeanor, taking a bite of my own breakfast. Kids. Since my parents were likely to sleep in late, I figured it would be a good opportunity to do something with Rita while we had the weekend to ourselves. I tried to bond with him when I could. "Hey, Rita," I spoke up, glancing at my preoccupied brother. Upon hearing his name, he perked up a little and turned towards me. With a grin on his face and a couple pieces of food stuck to his chin, the redhead responded. "Yeah?" He smiled. I couldn't help but grin at his silly appearance, his messy bedhead truly being the cherry on top. "After breakfast, did you want to play a game?" I suggested. I wasn't usually a huge gamer, but if it meant spending time with Rita, I was usually down for whatever. Games were one of his favorite things, and while I loved to let him play, I made sure to monitor the time he spent on them. I didn't want him to get too distracted from his responsibilities. Whatever game you want.
Even the racing one?
Reedna perked up to hear his unlimited options, which almost made me instantly regret my choice. The racing game. There was a particular car racing game he enjoyed a fair bit, but it was mostly because I was terrible at it. I don't know what it was about that game, but nothing I did seemed to go well when we played. I was a bit older, so you'd think I'd understand the mechanics better, but unfortunately, I failed to win a single game ever. Well, aside from that one time he let me win, I frowned thinking about it. He actually tricked me into thinking I was doing well while we played, and then once I won and celebrated like the fool I was, he informed me that he went easy on me and laughed at my expense. I made sure to bonk him on the head for that one. Even the racing one, I sighed in my dismay, popping another piece of sausage in my mouth. The things I do for my brother. Once we'd finished our breakfast, we went into the living room and took out the game system we owned. It was a newer system, so it didn't take long before we were playing his favorite game. Unsurprisingly, after a couple of hours, I had not won a single game, and when it came time to turn it off, a pout was seemingly glued to my lips. Reedna patted my back, as if to console my hurt pride, even if it should have been used to it by then.
You tried,
he tried to assure me, even though it sounded half-assed. Even I wasn't dumb enough to see how little the situation negatively affected him. Despite my grumpiness, I got over it soon and decided to shower, leaving Reedna to play in his room. Despite showering the day before, I felt pretty sweaty and wanted to get rid of that feeling before it got any later. I usually showered every other day or so. Removing my clothes, I hopped in the shower, which was pouring a warm stream of water into the tub. The steamy droplets hit the back of my neck as I climbed in, and I let out a sigh of satisfaction. Nothing beats a hot shower. Maybe it sounded strange, but I found that showering had sort of become my meditating place. It was where I spent a short amount of time relaxing and contemplating things in my mind without the distractions of others. I sighed into the warm, steamy air. One of the things that kept nagging in my mind again and again was the university. After all, in less than a year, I was going to be attending one. I still didn't really know what I was planning to study, though. I considered going in for a culinary arts degree, but my parents hadn't shown any support with that whatsoever. They never argued much about me having my job, but they expressed that they didn't think it was a good idea for me to dedicate my whole life to it. I disagreed, but to please them, I started looking into other degrees to see if there was something else I'd like to study. To be honest, though, I hadn't found a single thing that got my attention. I sighed again, bringing my hands up to my face and rubbing warm water across my skin. There was no point in getting stressed out about it. I needed solutions, but until I had some, just getting upset wouldn't bring about anything. Once I found the answers to my problems, I could deal with all the other annoying motions running rampant in my mind, and it would be fine. Running my hand through my face back into my hair, I felt the water run down my arm and drip off my elbow. I'd better start cleaning already. After my shower, I threw on some comfy clothes and sat at my desk, picking up my school books. I needed to study some more, but I felt so demotivated. None of the material we were covering was all that interesting, and with how sleep-deprived I was lately, my bed was beckoning me to return to its sheets once more. No, Kishka, you have to work. Come on. I pushed myself to pick up my science book, opening the cover and flipping to the page I'd bookmarked. I took out my notebook and began reviewing a couple notes I'd left there from class. I didn't take many, but the ones I did helped me focus on a few important points in my book. I read them over and wrote down more notes from my science book that I thought I might forget. After just a few minutes, I started to slow down. This was boring. The stale content and lack of stimulating activity from studying left me even more tired than before, and I felt my eyelids drooping. This won't do it all. I might as well prep for dinner at this point. At least I'd be getting something done. Standing up from my desk, I made my way back downstairs and into the kitchen. I was going to make beefsteak and a light vegetable stew that night, something kind of hearty and warm to help combat the weather. It took a fair bit of preparation due to all the vegetables that needed to be cut, so the therapeutic task gave me time to wake up. Taking out all the ingredients, I started to chop them upon a cutting board and began separating them into bowls once they were their appropriate sizes. About halfway through my prep, I heard familiar footsteps sound from the stairs and head my way into the kitchen. My father was awake at last, or at least awake enough to show himself to the rest of the household. I'm going to take a drink of tea.
Okay.
Morning, Kishka. He smiled and winced at the bright kitchen lights as he approached me. His hand raised to his forehead, holding it lightly to try and shield his eyes as he looked around. Do you have anything light for your mother? Something light to eat. My mother must have been experiencing a hangover. My eyes stayed fixed on my task at hand, not looking up at my parent. I think we still have some more leftovers in the fridge from the porridge I made the other night. I spoke back in my usual tone, scooping up the carrots I'd finished cutting and putting them in a bowl. I was thinking something less filling. She's having a hard time this morning. Can you make her some miso soup? My father filled a glass with water and turned back to the stairs. Oh, did I not have a choice in the matter? The side of my mouth twitched slightly, and I fought back the urge to sigh. I was already in the middle of preparing dinner, which was hardly ever done by my parents anymore, and yet now I was being asked to stop what I was doing to make a drunkard some easy-to-digest soup. Immediately, I became frustrated. Sure, I replied flatly, even though my father was probably didn't hear me as he darted up the stairs. The sound of their bedroom door shutting came moments later, and I rolled my eyes. I set down my knife. I guess I had to leave the dinner prep for later. Time to make some miso soup. I'll see you after school, okay? But right after that, we'll have to part ways so I can go to the cafe, all right? I told Reedna, confirming our plan for when school was over. My brother was starting to catch a cold, so I wanted to make sure I was there for him in case he needed me, even if I had to go to work afterwards. Something as simple as meeting with him after school could go a long way after all. Reedna simply nodded with a beaming smile, launching his arm up to show me a thumbs up from his gloved hand. I cracked a smile, giving him a thumbs up in return before ruffling his hair. All right, now go get to class before you're late, I told him, moving my hand off of his head and to my side. We were inside the entrance to his school, recovering in the warmth from our chilly walk. I let out a silent sigh as the reality set in that while my brother could stay inside the warm facility, I had to leave and brace the weather once more. I wasn't looking forward to it. Since my brother was several years younger than me, he went to a different school, and unfortunately, it was in the opposite direction of my own. Sucked, but such is life.
Bye, Kishka!
The boy sang, wrapping his arms around me in a tight hug before releasing, smiling, and running off down the hall. You shouldn't run, I mumbled, not really loud enough to be heard, especially with the noise of other kids scattered in the hallways. No matter, though. Rita had yet to fall over, so there probably wasn't much to worry about. Turning around, I opened the doors to the school and exited the building, squinting as the cold air hit my exposed skin, which unfortunately included my ears. I tried my best to tie my scarf tight around my neck to block out the cold, but honestly, without my hat, I was getting a bit cranky. I really hoped no one had stolen it. Keeping my eyes squinted as I walked against the wind, my gloved hands in my pocket, I walked forward in the direction of my high school. Times like these made me wish I had a good pair of headphones that could double as earmuffs. It wasn't something I could afford right then, with college not that far away, though. My parents said they'd help pay for my university, but in all honesty, I didn't feel that comfortable with them paying my entire way in. I thought I'd appreciate the schooling more and take it a lot more seriously if I was paying for myself. The wind started to pick up, so I lowered my head, attempting to deflect the wind off of my head and not into my eyes. I sighed, returning to my thoughts. Maybe I was only saying that because I still wasn't sure what I was going to school for. I didn't really want to pay a learning institution a ton of money just so I could learn how to do a bunch of stupid stuff I never cared about. Perhaps I'd figure out something as the school year came to a close. Once I entered my school, I slowly unraveled my scarf, which was slightly moist from my mouth on the way there. Without the wind, I was already feeling warmer, so I opened my shoe locker and crammed the accessories as well as my jacket inside, and then switched out my shoes. After a quick check in the mirror to make sure my uniform looked in order, I headed to class. Our school had a specific uniform dress code, like most high schools in the area. It allowed for some customization, but not a lot. I wore my long-sleeve white button-up shirt with a dark navy tie and a sweater over top. The sweater was provided from the school and came in both a navy and a wine color, and it was actually fairly warm. Black slacks were required, of course, and then we had our school shoes, which varied from black to brown. The socks could be any color we wanted, which some people used to their advantage, while others, like myself, didn't care that much and wore the standard white and black crew. My backpack was usually stuffed more than my other classmates, probably because they didn't have jobs to go to afterwards. Or at least I assumed so. Technically, it was against the rules of our school to have a part-time job, but it never really felt like it was enforced. Regardless, my full backpack probably looked a little wonky at times, but it was always like that, so it wasn't any different from usual. Entering my homeroom, the sound chattering buzzed in my ears, all the voices mashing into messy white noise. I didn't look up at anyone, simply walking to my desk and sitting. Well, more like collapsing into my seat. My legs were tired from the walk to school, and since I didn't catch that much sleep the night before, again, I was kind of drained as well. It was either cram for the test that night or suffer a bad grade, which was not an option. Looking at the top of my vacant desk, I looked below to see if my hat had ended up in the bottom compartment, but much to my dismay, it was not there. I grumbled under my breath, sitting back up. I guess that meant I had to go purchase a new one at some point. It also meant that I was going to be without my hat on both the walk to work and home later that night. I frowned. I was dreading the walk already. Moments later, our teacher arrived, so I refocused on the front of class as we did attendance. I'll be honest, I didn't pay a ton of attention in class, or at least not to my classmates. I'd like to think that I was good at listening fairly well, but my eyes wandered to the outdoors most of the time. My seat was right next to the window, so I often watched whatever was outside, whether it be the track, the pool, or the trees behind them. I always looked to find new and old things to inspect with my eyes, despite the objects being so far away. Looks like they still haven't fixed the cover to the pool. An edge was still up on the side, and the birds went in and out of the pool, likely wading in the melted snow atop the dirty water, or maybe getting coverage from the cold wind. The track also had a smudge on the lines, and it bugged me a lot. My eyes turned back to the class, listening to the teacher's lecture on some science thing. Boring. Maybe I would have been able to pay attention to class if I actually cared about what was being talked about. I wrote down some notes, looking at the blackboard before looking outside once more. It's starting to snow again. My eyes looked closely to see what kind of snowfall we were getting. Big and poofy flakes from the looks of it. Several of the snowflakes stuck together as they fell, making faster falling clusters of snow head towards the ground. A small smile inched on my lips before I tore myself away when the teacher called on me, asking me a question. Luckily, I knew the answer and stood up. Microbial life, I said. The teacher nodded at me and began another question, targeting a different student, which let me sit back down. Out of habit, my eyes went to look at the next student rise, watching them answer the question with a stammer before sitting down again. We never had a lot of stupid people in our class, really. Most people seemed to know the answers to everything, and even those who didn't weren't too bad when it came to grades. I think we were just a lucky class. Luckily, lunchtime was upon us, and not a moment too soon. My stomach gurgled with anticipation, and I reached for my bag to grab my lunchbox for consumption. As I fussed around getting my bag open, I noticed a figure come awfully close to me, so much so that I had to stop what I was doing to look up. It was a girl, probably a classmate of mine. She smiled down at me with her hands behind her back. I raised an eyebrow. I'd never spoken to her before, so she wasn't the least bit familiar to me. I wondered why she was there in front of me. The girl had blonde, layered hair just past her shoulders, short bangs above her eyebrows, and longer side bangs hugging her cheeks. She wore the female school uniform, which was a bit similar to the men's, but with a few differences. The top consisted of a white button-up, the same dark navy tie that the men wore, and the school's provided sweater. She, unlike I, wore a lighter navy skirt that went to her knees, followed by some thick dark navy tights. Altogether, she had a peculiar look, and I was surprised she hadn't stood out to me before. But all things considered, everyone usually melted into one big blur when I went from place to place at school. I wasn't really the social type, you could say. I minded my own business and hoped others respected that. However, it looked like that particular girl wasn't going to follow the regimen. I blinked and looked back to my bag before speaking to her. "Yes, can I help you?" I spoke to her in my flat-line voice, finally fishing out my food and a small water bottle I had managed to stuff in my bag that morning. When the items were in my hands, I set them on my desk and closed my bag. In that time, the female student had walked around to the front of my desk, beaming still.
Can I eat lunch with you?
She chimed, hands still behind her back, which left me a bit suspicious, but not enough to say anything. I blinked at her words to me, puzzled by why this random classmate of mine wanted to do such a thing. I assumed we had been in the same class for a little while, but if that was the case and she'd not spoken to me until just then, it made it even weirder. "I don't know," I said indecisively, looking back down on my lunch before speaking again. "I don't really know who you are, so it'd be weird. Can you sit with someone else?" I didn't know what else to say. It was true. I didn't know her at all. Not her name, not her role in the class, not what kind of person she was, or what kind of friend she had. It would be really weird. And sooner or later, she'd find out how strange it'd be for her too. After all, she came out of nowhere requesting to eat lunch with a random classmate she'd never spoken with before. She seemed pretty persistent, though, leaning in closer to me. It was as if she was hoping I'd change my mind just by staring at me. However, it only made me feel uneasy, and the desire of wanting her to go away grew stronger. Her expression changed again, a pout appearing on her face before her eyes looked up, seeming to ponder something. I frowned. My stomach was really growling then, the hunger setting in as the awkward situation festered. "So..." I cleared my throat, looking up at her, and then glancing to the right of myself, and then back at her again, hoping she'd understand the gesture. Jeez, this is awkward. I started to open up my lunchbox before the girl spoke up again, startling me with how loud she spoke.
Listen, you left your hat behind last Friday, and I was trying to think of a way to bring it up without me sounding creepy.
The girl spoke extremely quickly, barely leaving a moment for her to breathe in between words.
But I guess I failed and sounded creepier than I wanted to.
She cut herself off mid-sentence, watching my expression morph to a confused and disturbed one.
Anyway, I have your hat. I saw you left it behind, and I went to chase after you the other day, but you were already gone, so...
At last she brought her hands out from behind her back and revealed my missing hat. Oh. That's where it went. I was both relieved that my hat had shown up, but also a bit disturbed from the girl's behavior. "Oh," was all I could say in response, moving my hand out to take it.
"I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come off so creepy, and I'm sure you probably still think I'm creepy for taking it home with me, but don't worry."
Oh. Sorry, I lost my place. Kisaka writes a book and then loses her place.
I'm sure you probably still think I'm creepy for taking it home with me, but it was a mistake, honest. By the time I was outside trying to find you, I realized what time it was and I had to rush home. But don't worry, I watched it for you, so please, forgive me.
The blonde bowed her head and thrusted my hat out further in my direction before finally closing her lips. The girl just rambled on, and it almost felt endless to me. Honestly, she could have just said she took it home on accident and gave it back. Apparently, it wasn't that simple. Taking the hat from her hands, the strong aroma of a girly fruity detergent hit my senses, and I almost flinched. Oh great, now I'm going to smell like fruit when going to work today. All I could do was sigh and stuff the hat in my backpack, turning back to the girl. Now that her deed was done, surely she'd leave me to eat, right? We'd already wasted so much time with the world's most meaningless exchange. "Sure, thanks for returning it," I told her, looking her in the eyes before tearing my gaze away to look to my lunchbox, where I'd finally lifted the lid off. The fruity smell in the air was replaced with my food's aroma instead. My lunch was salmon over rice with seasonings on top, tuna, and a side of vegetables. My water bottle also had little writings on it, all of which Reedner wrote several years ago. He claimed it was a good luck charm. The girl instantly reacted at the reveal of my food, gasping and leaving me to groan inwardly. I guess our exchange wasn't over yet.
Ah, you brought such good-looking food, Emoji. Your mom must be a really good cook, huh?
She spoke, bafflingly. Firstly, my meal that day was not anything special at all, and secondly, the mom bit kind of made me frown. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had actually cooked anything at all. I smirked at the blonde slightly, which she caught on to, smiling a bit wider in response.
So anyway, do you think I can sit with you? I mean, if you really think it's still weird, I can...
It seems she was a persistent one. Unfortunately, I wasn't really in the mood to converse with a complete stranger, especially one who had taken a piece of my clothing home without permission. Accident or not, it still painted a weird image of her, and I wasn't going to ignore that. Maybe tomorrow. I spoke, staring at my food and avoiding her intense gaze. She fidgeted a little out of my peripheral.
Tomorrow? Okay.
You could hear her grin just by how she spoke, her bouncing from one leg to the other. I took up my chopsticks and began to pick up pieces of my lunch, putting it in my mouth and ignoring the girl. Somehow, it felt as if the situation would have been better if I just agreed to her eating with me, because the girl was then silent, but still situated in front of my desk. She wasn't even doing anything. I glanced up in her direction, and she smiled when we caught each other's eyes. Instinctually, I looked away again and back to my food, which I slowly consumed. This was really awkward. Was she just going to watch me eat? After what felt like a lifetime, and one more bite of my food, she spoke up once more.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow then, Emoji.
With that, she bowed and skipped off to her own desk, finally leaving and permitting me some peace and quiet. Wait a minute. How did she know my last name? And was she really going to take the tomorrow thing seriously? Furrowing my brow, I continued to eat in confusion and slight concern. Maybe she was a stalker. I took my hat back out and inspected it thoroughly, just in case it had been rigged with anything. Luckily, it looked like it was free of anything suspicious. I put my hat back in my bag and continued eating in silence like usual. It was weird, but I was thankful that the situation was over with. I didn't need more things to worry about. I wasn't really a fan of winter, or the cold really. It wasn't even officially winter yet, but the temperature was so cold it reminded me of the season. Either way, I wasn't a fan of the uncomfortable weather that I was experiencing already, so I was not looking forward to getting the next few months where I'd likely get colder. One upside to my day was that I at least had my hat again, so the cold air wasn't piercing through my skull anymore. At that moment, I was walking to my brother's school so I could take him home. I was walking along the same sidewalk as multiple other people who were also heading towards home, but weren't likely going to work afterwards like myself. Most of the people surrounding me were students from my high school, laughing and talking amongst one another. I didn't recognize any of them, but that wasn't really surprising considering I wasn't friends with anyone from my school, or really anyone at all. I don't know how it became that way. I guess I just wasn't good at socializing. I'd always been a bit of a loner, though. Even in elementary, I had never really had a friend group, nor really hung out with anyone longer than half an hour or so. I think in the past, when I was really young, I was invited to a few birthday parties, and a few classmates talked to me, but it never really stuck for very long. Before I knew it, I was going through my life without anyone to talk to at all, aside from my family and coworkers. It was interesting, really. I was about to graduate, and I didn't care about who would end up attending the same university that I did. I guess when I phrased things like that, it sounded pretty pitiful, but honestly, I didn't really think I needed any friends. My extra time was spent with my brother and baking at the cafe, and I loved those things more than the world. I would hate for something else to get in the way of them, even if it were some person I called a friend, so I was fine with how things were. My eyes wandered to across the street where 3 students all laughed among one another. They looked carefree, like they were enjoying life. The joy behind their eyes and the happiness that they seemed to exude reminded me of being at the cafe with customers who enjoyed the creations I'd made. It made my heart swell with happiness. I couldn't imagine anyone else being able to do that for me. Suddenly, a flowery scent tickled my nose. Instinctively, I scrunched up my face and glanced around. Even though most of the students who were walking in the same direction I was were gone, the unfamiliar scent found its way to me. What the heck? There was no one in front of me and no one behind me. I wondered if that weird blonde girl from class was stalking me or something and... Wait. That's what it was. I grabbed my hat, which was set snug against my head, and pulled it down to my nose. Right. How could I have forgotten? The girl mentioned that she had washed my hat, and with the wind stopping and going as it pleased, it made sense that I would start smelling the fruity detergent once again. I fixed my hat back onto my head, moving back some of my curls, which had slid up onto my cheeks with the adjustment. Just who was that girl anyway? I had never spoken with her before, and she never said anything to me until now. And I didn't even know her name. Yet she knew mine. What a strange person. Despite the interaction being annoying, I was curious and wanted to know what exactly her deal was. There had to have been a reason she approached me, other than to give my hat back, of course. Actually, why didn't she just leave my hat on my desk from the start? I blinked. Was she playing a joke on me by taking my stuff and pretending to find it to give it back? She seemed pretty sociable, so I wouldn't be surprised if her and a group of friends were all laughing about it or something. After all, I didn't have much of a reputation at school, and I didn't try to make it better or worse either. Maybe I was being bullied. I laughed at the thought, though. If a group of students decided to bully me, they chose the wrong guy, because I didn't really ensure any good reactions. It'd be pretty boring. Whatever it was that was going on, I just hoped it would clear itself up soon, so I could go back to my quiet everyday life. I had a lot of things to do as I prepared for graduation, so I didn't have the time to get involved in other dumb stuff. Arriving at my brother's school, Rena came running out upon seeing me, and we began our trek home almost immediately. It seemed my brother wasn't doing too badly that evening, but by then he had a runny nose. As much as I would have loved to dote on him that night and try and make him feel better, I'd have to leave it up to my parents because of work. I'm working late, so I'll see you tomorrow morning. Don't stay up too late, okay? I clarified with Reedna once we reached our house. Reedna nodded and grinned, wiping snot off of his top lip with his coat sleeve. I patted his head, let him inside, and locked the door behind him before heading to work. Now for my favorite part. Work began like usual, and once I started preparing and baking, all my stresses and fears melted away to nothing. It was especially slow that night, so I probably went a little overboard with adding extra fancy touches to people's dishes, but I couldn't help it. With all the extra time on hand, and being able to hear excitable gasps and squeals from the floor when the customers received their sweets, how could I not? The customer closed without a problem that night, and after I headed home, I almost immediately drifted to sleep in preparation for the next day. I entered my classroom with a yawn, slumping over despite my backpack being lighter than the day before. I didn't have to work that evening, so I didn't need to pack my uniform, but as usual, I didn't get much sleep and was paying for it yet again. Reaching my desk, I slumped my bag against the back of my chair and was about to slide into my seat until a familiar blonde-headed girl slid her way beside me. "Morning, Emochi!" She beamed loudly, immediately garnering the attention of a few of our classmates in the room. Maybe I was being bullied. Looking away from the several pair of eyes who'd fixated themselves on us, I sat down and didn't say anything. I wasn't really a fan of attention, most especially from multiple parties. Regardless of intent, I would rather just sit by myself and have everyone ignore my existence than to all pay mind to it. The girl stood there for a moment, not saying anything or moving, before she turned around and went back towards her desk. Phew. Hopefully that was the only thing I'd have to worry about that day. I didn't know if the girl thought I was super social or something, or maybe she got me confused with someone else, but her behavior was unnerving. Before I had any more time to think about the situation, our teacher walked in and quickly began class. Once lunch rolled around, I was startled by yet another deviation from my everyday routine. The small blonde girl had marched up to my desk yet again, but this time she was struggling to carry her own desk over, setting it across from mine without a word. I narrowed my eyes at the situation, not doing well to hide my frustration as I scowled. Apparently, maybe tomorrow, in her head, meant please come eat with me at lunch tomorrow, or something. Could Considering how much attention she had attracted just that morning, I had to try not to make a scene during lunch as well, no matter how frustrated I was. I would put up with it for that day, if for no other reason than to not come off looking like a complete jerk. After that, though, it was pretty normal for classmates to move their desks to join with another's to eat and socialize together, but considering how this girl and I weren't exactly friends, it made it extremely awkward to see her doing such a thing. Also, the fact that the girl had a hard time moving her desk at all made it even weirder.
Hey, Emochi,
she grinned, sitting down at the desk that she had set against mine and taking out her lunch. At that point, I'd already started to eat my food, trying to ignore the awkward situation. I'm gonna take a drink of water. My lunch was a little fancier that day, consisting of leftover veggie stew and fried fish wrapped in seaweed.
Your food looks so good today too, Emochi,
the blonde classmate said as she looked to my food with wide eyes before settling back on her own, frowning.
Mine isn't anything that good.
Her main dish was rice with some peppers and a roasted red tomato on top, and her side dishes were carrots and celery. Well, she wasn't wrong. I didn't say anything in response, looking at her food and then back to mine before taking another bite. As we ate, the girl remained mostly quiet and just enjoyed the food she had put into her mouth bite by bite, leaving me to feel even more awkward. While it felt nice to be eating in silence, it was as if I was ignoring the elephant in the room. We were eating lunch together, with our desks against one another's, when we didn't even know each other, and I didn't even know her name. The longer we sat there in silence, the more awkward it got. Okay, I have to say something. This is too much for me to handle. How do you know my name? I asked, thinking of the only thing I could ask her. She had looked up from her food with a small smile as she popped a single piece of rice into her mouth that had stuck onto her lip.
Oh, that's because I try to make it a point to memorize everyone's name in class. I don't think you and I have ever spoke before, so I'm glad I've been able to use your name in a conversation.
The girl then blinked and looked away bashfully.
Granted, you probably think that's pretty weird, huh? I know your name and had a possession of yours just the other day.
She wasn't wrong about that. It was a little creepy. The girl winced, shutting her eyes and covering her face, chopsticks still in hand.
I'm sorry for being so creepy. I make terrible first impressions,
she whined. It was a little reassuring that the girl was at least a little self-aware of how creepy she came off. However, she wasn't aware enough to avoid embarrassing me that morning. That was for sure. It's okay, I assured her, even though it was a lie. She was kind of creepy and weird, but seemed pretty harmless. So far. I probably shouldn't hold it against her. We had only just met. That's interesting that you try to memorize names. That seems too exhausting. We have a lot of classmates, you know. I attempted to think of something else to say. The girl dropped her hands from her face slowly, her little eyes peeking up from behind them. She watched my expression, and though it had not changed since we had started eating, she didn't ask for extra clarification on my answer, and went on to respond to my next statement.
Yeah, I know, but it's not, I promise. I happen to be pretty good at memorizing things, so it's more like a game versus a chore. Plus, if I could talk to my classmates one by one like this and know their names without having to ask, it seems more convenient.
She ended her sentence in a questioning way, talking more to herself than me at that point.
Speaking of which...
The girl quickly gulped down the rest of her rice before continuing to speak.
I didn't introduce myself to you yet.
Suddenly, the blonde stood up and outstretched her hand to me, a big grin across her face.
Purapi Kikamura. My friends call me Rofi, but you can call me whatever you want.
The sudden stand and introduction caught me by surprise, and I couldn't help but just sit there, staring at her hand for a moment before taking it finally. So informal. Nice to meet you, I spoke to her, the girl squeezing my hand a little before letting go. She then took her hand back to do a little salute, grinning in a goofy manner.
The pleasure's all mine,
she beamed. Chapter 2. Unexpectations. Returning home with Rena was a little more of a struggle that day. It wasn't too bad weather-wise, but my brother's symptoms were worse. So much so, it was bogging him down physically. He wasn't quite as chipper as he usually was, and was more easily whiny because of how he felt. So since our parents were working late again, I decided to treat him to some pizza on our way home. That was one of his favorite junk foods, so I decided that was the best way to bring his spirits up. I I picked up some more medicine for you to take to school tomorrow. Make sure you take it at lunch, okay? I told my sick little brother, smoothing out his hair on his head that the wind had positioned in a strange fashion. Reedna nodded, and we entered the pizza parlor, us immediately being greeted by the warmth and aroma of the eatery. Almost instantly, Reedna perked up, a big smile stretched on his face. Mmm, he hummed in excitement, hands clasped in one another. The sight made even me smile, feeling relieved for his happiness, even if it was only temporary. Can we get a classic pizza, please? 12-inch, please, I told the worker at the register, pulling out my money. After the man had pressed a few buttons on his screen, I handed him the total change and then sat down at the nearby booth. I looked around. Rita had yet to sit down and was walking around looking at the decorated interior of the restaurant. It was an American-styled pizza parlor, so it was decked out in black and white with accents of red everywhere. It was cute, and it was clear that Rita found it interesting. Slumping in the booth, I let my body weight fall forward, leaning against the red plastic table as I waited for our food. I wondered why things felt differently lately. Maybe it was because I'd had an unusual amount of socialization recently. I wasn't sure. It felt a little bizarre to even think about it, though. I never did a lot of that. Socializing, I mean. I sighed. It wasn't going to be long before everything returned to normal, though. I wasn't really an interesting person, so Kikamura, that one blonde girl, wouldn't be in the equation much longer. I looked forward to it. I shut my eyes and focused on the noises from inside the business to soothe my tired mind. Clattering from the kitchen, low music playing over the intercom, and hushed talking from the employees in the back filled my mind. That, mixed with Reedna's almost rhythmic footsteps, left my body to go into full relax mode. My body stopped feeling so heavy, and I started to drift to sleep unintentionally. I shouldn't sleep, but it's not like it's a bad place to do so, right? The place isn't busy after all. Eventually, I ended up falling asleep. Not for long, but long enough to make me feel a little more energized and jumpier upon waking.
Kishka, the pizza's ready,
Reedna sounded from my left ear, jolting me awake. Grunting as I sat up and forced my body to rise, my eyes set on my little brother. He was holding our food, which was a single pizza cut up in equal slices on a tray. Glancing towards the register, the man there gave me a sympathetic look before he had excused himself to the back. He must have related with my exhaustion. I just blinked and looked back to our food, which Reedna had set in the middle of the booth. It smells good. My brother grinned from ear to ear as his hands darted towards the pizza. He licked his lips and took a huge bite before shrieking as the hot food burnt his lips. I couldn't stop a chuckle from slipping out of my lips, despite how loud he'd yelled. So cute. Not so loud, I smiled, shaking my head. Reedna looked a little embarrassed, pressing his lips together and looking away from my gaze. He then picked up his piece again, blew on the end, and then slowly bit down. This time, it went a lot better, and he happily chewed away at his slice without a single complaint. Nodding in acceptance, I also grabbed a slice, taking a bite and enjoying the warm, greasy, carb-filled food. I didn't normally indulge in that sort of stuff, so it was likely that I'd be paying for it later. But at the time, it was a nice treat. We finished up our food and left shortly afterwards before it got too late, making it home just before my parents. Once inside, Reedna began to work on his homework at the kitchen counter, and I stood by in case he needed help. When my parents entered the house that evening, I greeted them at the door, insistent on letting them know Reedna's condition. Hold on just a moment. Okay. Hey, Reedna's getting sick, I told my father as he picked up his suitcase again and moved towards his office. I frowned. I hoped my father was going to bed soon and not planning on working all night. He really worked too much. Oh, can you pick up some medicine for him then? My father said with a light sigh, logging into his laptop that he'd pulled out of his bag. His eyes were then glued to the screen. Not that I was one to complain about eye contact, since I was pretty bad about maintaining it myself, but it was worth mentioning that he did not once look my way as the two of us spoke. He must have had a stressful day. Yeah, I already did, I responded as I leaned against the doorway to his office, running my nails against the bottom of my shirt. My eyes trailed the seam, noticing that a thread had broken at some point. He'll be fine then, it's probably just a cold, my father said, sinking down in his chair. He spun around to face his computer that he had set on his desk, no longer facing my way at all. Ah, guess our conversation was over then. Okay, I stammered, not bothering to hide my discomfort in my speech. I understood if he had had bad day, but it felt pretty bad to be pretty much ignored. Even I had feelings. But whatever, arguing wasn't going to change anything, especially not when it came to my father. If he'd made a decision, he'd stick with it no matter what. Bummed, I left his office and passed by my mother, who'd just gotten home as well. She immediately picked up on my mood, touching my shoulder as I passed. Hey honey, you okay? She smiled in concern. I looked up at her and shrugged with my neutral expression. It's nothing, I said. Not saying anything to her had never changed anything. I didn't want to hear another scolding of how I should listen to your father. He knows best, which I'm sure was true most of the time. They were adults. They were older and had more experience in life than me, but I couldn't help but feel like they were wrong sometimes too. However, no one liked to hear someone say they were wrong. I just had to suck it up and move on. My mother didn't push the issue and just nodded. She then walked over to my brother, fiddling with his hair a bit and checking on his homework. Since she was busy with that, I figured I could go and head to bed early. I had worked the next day, so I needed all the energy I could get. I hoped I could actually get good sleep for once, but knowing me, chances were low no matter how early I laid down. Oh well. It was lunchtime at school once more, and Putopi Kikamura joined me once again. She, like the day before, did not ask and simply invited herself to my desk. I didn't say anything, just like last time, and simply let her do as she pleased. The afternoon started similarly like the last, with her complimenting my lunch and whining about her own. Maybe the girl really was just really poor and hoped I would hook her up with some food or something. Whether that was the case or not, it wasn't going to work.
So yesterday, I saw 5 cats on my way home. 5! None of them let me pet them, though. I wonder what I'm doing wrong. Are you a cat person?
The blonde rambled on, looking to me with her big brown eyes once she'd asked the question. I glanced up slightly before looking back down at my food. Not really. I wasn't a huge fan of cats, or any animal at that. But that was probably because I didn't grow up with any. I think I may have asked for a gerbil when I was little, but I was quickly shut down by my parents. I'd also seen a few dogs being walked on my way to school, but nothing really drew me to them.
Oh, well, I really like cats. They have so much grace and elegance. Well, except when they're digging in the trash.
Kikamura let rip a loud laugh, a hand on her stomach as she caught her breath. I didn't understand what was so funny. So, I cleared my throat, looking from my empty lunchbox to the small, energetic blonde across from me. Why are you sitting here? I realized what I'd said came off a little rude and quickly added to my question. I mean, why sit here with a guy you don't know instead of sitting with your friends? There. That sounded better. I honestly wanted to know, but I also wanted to throw her a hint, even though I didn't expect her to get it. She seemed like a bit of an airhead. Kikamura turned her head to the side as if she was processing my question. It took but a second before she smiled and turned her head back straight again.
Because I think you're interesting.
Her answer came as a bit of a shock to me, but also left me feeling suspicious as well. I still wasn't 100% convinced that she wasn't trying to bully me. Interesting, I repeated, looking away from her. Her constant eye contact was making me feel uneasy.
Yeah, you seem really interesting, and I want to get to know you.
Her naive words irked me. I wasn't interesting in the slightest. I really wish she'd realized that and left me alone and found someone else to be interested in. After all, her feelings were anything but mutual. Well, sort of. Don't get me wrong. She piqued my interest, but in a I'd read a book about this kind of way, not a let's be friends and learn about each other kind of way. I really didn't have the time or the patience, and in case you couldn't tell, our personalities didn't exactly complement each other. I decided not to say anything in response, and before long, lunch was over, and she had taken her desk back to where it belonged. The rest of the school day zoomed by, and all that was left was cleanup. After school, Different classmates took turns to clean up the classroom. Even though that day wasn't supposed to be my turn, I volunteered to take over for a classmate who left sick earlier that day. My shift at the cafe started a little later than usual, too, so it worked out. I had already started to regret my choice, though. My classmates who were cleaning alongside me kept staring my way. Maybe it was because I'd never cleaned the classroom with them before. It bothered me. Their stares. Did I have a bug on my face or something? Did my hair look dumb? Maybe I had a weird stain on my pants. Regardless of their reasoning, it was a bit annoying. My mind went back to that Kikamura girl again. Maybe they were friends of hers. The lot never once said anything to me, and only glancing and watching while we cleaned. I wish they would at least have said something to me if they wanted to stare so much. I tried my best to ignore them, which wasn't all that easy, and eventually we were all done, and I headed to Reedna's school to take him home before work. The walk home was a little less than pleasant that time around due to the temperature, and the unfortunate icing on the cake was my little brother's physical well-being. When I arrived to Reedna's school, he was undoubtedly crankier and sicker looking than before, but there wasn't a whole lot I could have done. As we departed towards home, I attempted to console him and tell him he'd be better soon. But I don't know how much help it really did. I'd have to pick up some better medicine for him if his health didn't improve.
Can I stay home from school tomorrow?
He asked me with a pout, his pink nose shining under the streetlights as we walked. Poor kid. You can't. Remember last year when you got sick? Unless you're running a fever, Mom and Dad still said you still have to go to school. I explained to him. Our parents were strict on attendance, and they didn't consider a cold to be a good reason to miss school. They made that painfully clear the year before. Reedna pouted more, both his shoulders and head slumping. I really didn't want to be the bad guy, but I had no choice. If you keep taking that medicine I gave you, then you should feel better soon, okay? I knew my words didn't help his mood in the slightest, but I had to be the strong one in that situation. After all, he could have started feeling better soon, and then his pouting would have been all for nothing. Being sick sucked, but it was a part of being human.
Okay,
he mumbled, his hand reaching out to grab mine. I took it without a moment's delay and gave it a small squeeze. Poor guy. I meant to do this. There we go. Okay.
Ah, shit, Emoji, I meant to write down strawberry instead of cherry for the shortcake. Is there any chance you could remake that for me?
One of the waitresses cursed, holding her hands together in a begging motion. It's not like I really had much of a choice, though. We couldn't send out an item that the customer didn't want. Things would not end well, most especially if they had an allergy of some sort. Blinking once, I nodded at her with my blank expression and turned back to my workstation. It was a little busy, all the students having gotten out of school and all the adults calling an end to their workday. But it wasn't busy enough for me to sweat making another shortcake for a customer. It couldn't be helped. Whipping up the newly modified order, I put it up in the window as usual, and the waitress popped up in excitement, smiling and waving with both hands before taking it.
Thank you, Emoji!
Quickly, she hopped off to deliver the order, and before long, a new order, three, popped in, and I was back to work once again. I didn't feel too exhausted about it, though. I looked forward to being able to release orders out to the hungry customers. With a yawn, I took out some flour and cinnamon, poured those into a bowl, and then turned to the refrigerator to pull out some eggs and milk. Just as I had started mixing it all together, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, causing me to jump. That was weird. I hardly got any phone calls. It was probably my mother alerting me that she wouldn't be home for dinner, thinking I was at home or something. She didn't really know my work schedule that well. In fact, she'd never even been to my workplace at all. I shrugged. Well, whatever it was, I felt confident that it could wait until the rush of orders calmed down. After making about a dozen different sweets, I had a slow period, so I threw my gloves off and pulled my phone out, moving to the corner of the room to stay out of the way. Opening my phone, I glanced to see who my missed call was. My school? I shrugged. It probably wasn't that important. I shook my head, not bothering to check the voicemail. I'd check it after work. I put my phone back in my pocket and put my gloves on so I could continue to work. Honestly, if school wanted to tell me something, they could have said it while I was there earlier. I didn't have time to spend on school stuff when I was at work. Hell, I barely had time to attend class and study. I sighed. One of my coworkers must have caught on to my irritancy, though, as he tapped me on the shoulder to get my attention. You all right, Emochi? my male coworker asked, offering a small smile as he used his other arm to wipe sweat off of his forehead. I blinked and then smiled a little before I nodded. Yeah, it's just getting tired of distractions is all, I said as I shut my eyes and sighed. Yeah, I understand. I just want to work quickly, and then get out of here, you know. At that, the man walked back to his side of the kitchen, eyeing his next order to work on. I looked back to my side of the back room and stared at my empty list of orders. Well, I guess I could always kill time by finishing side work. Okay, so the start of this next paragraph has a drawing. Every single chapter has a different drawing associated with it, and I'm going to show you guys the one that's for this one. Hey, I changed you. Why did you not change? Hold on. What the heck? There we go. Okay, we did it. Okay. The sound of coughing filled the kitchen as Reedna struggled to cover his mouth, his nose a shiny red color. He was getting sicker day by day. He wasn't quite running a fever, but he was bogged down for sure. As much as I wanted to suggest him to stay home from school, he wasn't sick enough for it to be actually justified. If he'd get any sicker, though, I would make sure to keep him home. However, it reminded me that I would also have to skip school and maybe even work to take care of him. Ugh, the situation was not ideal. Here, I handed my brother a small cup of medicine with a warm cup of lemon tea next to it. You better warm up today, you better warm up today as much as you can before we head off, okay? It's not as windy today, but it's really cold. The news said it's going to be -4 degrees Celsius at the lowest, but it won't get much warmer than that. I instructed him, watching the smaller redhead reluctantly pick up his cup of medicine. Gulping it down quickly, the boy then stuffed some waffles in his mouth to drown out the bitter taste. Okay, Kishka, he pouted, clearly looking like he didn't want to attend school that day. I felt bad for him. I honestly did. No one wanted to go to school or work or anywhere other than home when he felt sick. Rita picked up the mug of tea, slowly sipped from it, and then reached for a tissue afterwards. He looked so sad. I shook my head. Enough pity. We both had places to be, and from the sound coming from the front door, so did my parents. Bye, boys. Have a good day at school, my mother called before shutting the door behind her. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our drawing. Hold on. There we go. Bye, boys. Have a good day at school, my mother called before shutting the door behind her. I made a clicking sound with my tongue in annoyance at her ignorance. She didn't even pay attention to her sick son. Honestly, they weren't even proper parents, were they? I turned around to the fridge and pulled out both my brother and I's lunchboxes and water bottles. I quickly tucked mine away in my backpack before turning to my brother. Listen, I'm going to pack a little more medicine here, okay? Take it with your lunch and it'll help your body pains go away for a little bit. I told Reedna as I looped around to his side of the counter, putting his lunch and medicine in his bag. Reedna slowly sipped at his tea, not saying much. I walked up next to him and ruffled his hair before I smiled. Are you going to be okay today? I asked him. His eyes moved up to look into mine. He blinked a couple times before looking away and setting the mug down. Yeah. Reedna spoke up with a small smile as he leaned into my hand that was still resting on his head. I smiled a little more, pitifully, more than anything, and wrapped both arms around my brother in an attempt to comfort him. Come on, we need to get going if we're going to be on time, I said with a frown. Reedna wrapped his arms around me too. I had to break the embrace after a few moments. Come on. Eventually my brother did pick himself up off of the stool and suited himself up for the great outdoors, decked from head to toe. Our walk went a little slower that day, but I didn't mind since I didn't want to push Reedna too much. After all, we were walking in the cold, which wasn't the safest for him in his vulnerable state. I didn't understand why my parents had not considered purchasing me a car. They had the funds, but they were so insistent on paying for my college and nothing but that, despite the fact I had saved quite a bit of my own money for college too. But there was no budging on my parents once they'd made a decision. They were very stubborn, most especially my father. Once the two of us arrived at my brother's school, we made our goodbye quick, and then I headed towards my school. Because of how much slower Reedna had walked that morning, my leisurely walk to my own school had turned into a sprint. At least the momentum kept me warm. Gonna drink some water. When I arrived at my school, I realized I'd gotten there earlier than anticipated. So the shoe locker room, which was usually pretty barren by the time I got there, was now crowded with other students. It was a little suffocating, and I frowned and scooted to the nearest wall. There wasn't much I could do about it, since I was already there, and the crowds were better than the outside cold. So I just tried to make my best to stay out of the way, and scooted towards my own locker. Opening it, I stuffed my hat and scarf on top of my shoes, and kept my coat on until I got to the classroom, as per usual. After I squeezed through the crowd with my backpack still on, I entered the less crowded hallway and walked to my classroom, yawning a little as I did so. Okay, I actually got some decent sleep the night before, but despite that, I was still feeling a little drowsy. Maybe I'd crash early that night to catch up on all the sleep I'd missed. That's how that worked, right? Once I was inside the classroom, I slipped between a group of students and finally sat at my desk. I took my jacket off and set both that and my backpack over the back of my seat, letting myself slump into the seat. I glanced outside at the cloudy white sky. I frowned. I missed autumn. It was a bit chilly during that time, even for a jacket or hoodie, but you could actually still see the blue sky and the sun. It was relaxing. But the winter wasn't fun at all. It was too cold. The skies were white and dreary, and when there was sun, its rays would just bounce off the snow and blind you. Oh, and snow. I didn't like it. I spent the next little while spacing out until class started, and even when class did start, I still found myself looking outside and just losing myself in thoughts and worries. How was Reedna? Surely they'd call me if he got severely ill at school, right? But what if he did get sicker? If he got so sick to the point of needing to go to the hospital, my parents would have to take a day off just to take him there. I may be his brother, but I wasn't even considered an adult, so I wasn't qualified as his guardian. I frowned. What about my work? What if they wouldn't let me have the time off? I closed my eyes, frowning further at my thoughts. I had doubts that Reedna would be able to handle another day of walking in the cold, especially if it got any colder. With his immune system getting attacked by whatever virus that was getting him down, he was likely to be weak against the cold, too. Before I realized it, my worries had passed my class by, and it was time again for lunch. However, my stomach was so twisted up because of all my worries that I was hardly hungry. After I took my lunchbox and water bottle out of my bag, I looked back to the front of my desk, seeing a familiar head of bright blonde hair. The owner of said hair was smiling faintly at me, moving her hand up to wave even though she was right in front of me.
Hey, Emoji!
Kikamura greeted me, holding her eye contact with me until I looked away. With all the extra stress in my life right then, I wasn't looking forward to talking to her in the slightest. Well, I wouldn't even call what we do talking. It was more like I was just listening while she yammered on. I don't think there was a proper word to describe it.
You look a little off today. Are you all right?
Without asking permission, the girl pulled a chair up to my desk and plopped down from across the table before pulling out her lunch. She didn't drag her own desk over this time for whatever reason, so there was significantly less room. How annoying. My brother is sick, I said, keeping my lunch closed in box, but reaching for my water bottle instead. After taking a small sip from my water, I regained eye contact with Kikamura as she frowned in response to my words.
Your brother is sick? That sucks. How old is he?
The short blonde girl asked, opening her own lunch and pulling a juice box out from her skirt pocket. I leaned back in my seat, focusing on my water bottle in hand once more. He's 12, I mumbled. I didn't really want to go into detail about the situation. It wouldn't really have helped anything anyway. Also, I don't really know where I would start. In case you couldn't already tell, I wasn't good at talking to people. It wasn't my strong point at the very least.
Being sick is no fun. Is he at home right now?
Kikamura continued to inquire about my situation. I already regretted opening my mouth. I sighed a little and pressed my thumbs against the ridge to my water bottle. Can we talk about something else? I said abruptly, not doing well at holding in my frustration. I probably should have felt bad for treating her rudely, but it wasn't like I had asked her to approach me in the first place. She was sticking her nose in where it didn't belong, and I wasn't fond of it.
Oh, sure.
Kikamura nodded and started to chomp on her food. Ah, right. I guess I should start eating too, even if I don't feel like it. I opened up my lunchbox and revealed the day's spread, which was fried tofu and asparagus, with sides of oranges and pecans. It was a pretty light lunch, and as if on cue, Kikamura spoke up in response to the reveal of my food.
Whoa, another fancy lunch!
Her eyes sparkled with excitement, suddenly lighting up with an idea.
Oh, I know, let's talk about food. That's exciting, right?
Her tone practically begged me to agree with her, and I could only furrow my brows a bit, shrugging. I guess. I didn't exactly know how to respond to that. Did she take me as an excitable person or something?
Okay, what's your favorite food? Mine has got to be eggs, pork cutlet, and bacon. Well, I don't know, though. I'm a big fan of cream puffs, too.
The girl rambled on as she almost started drooling, seemingly daydreaming about her favorite foods. She audibly slurped her spit back into her mouth, and she then stuffed the rest of her rice into it as well.
What about you?
She asked with her mouth full, pointing her chopsticks at me. I guess I'd have to participate in the conversation as well. My favorite is probably... That was actually a hard question for me to answer. I had never really thought about it before, I guess. I liked a lot of food, but to narrow it down to a category such as my favorite... I looked up and down and thought hard about it, subconsciously rubbing the side of my neck. If I had to pick, it would probably be white chocolate strawberry lava cake, I said with a nod, sitting up straight and looking to the girl. She looked shocked at what I said, raising her eyebrows distinctly. I guess it was rather specific, wasn't it? What could I say? If you tried it, and you had a sweet tooth like me, you'd know why it was my favorite.
Wow, you have a fancy-sounding favorite!
Kikamura beamed, but quickly switched that out for a pout, crossing her arms.
You make my favorite sound so boring.
Her pout didn't last for long though, her quickly switching back to her regular grin and proceeding to sip from her juice box until it was empty.
Okay, then what's your favorite drink? Don't you always bring water to lunch?
Stalker. The words flew from my lips before I had time to stop them. Seriously, just how long has this girl been watching me in class? I seriously had only brought water to lunch the past few days, but it was true that I had only brought water to lunch the past few days, but it was true that I only ever drank water. I might have been acting a bit paranoid, but maybe there was a reason for that.
Huh? What was that?
She blinked. Oh, I guess she didn't hear me. Nothing, I responded quickly, keeping a straight face, which was pretty easy for me to do. I cleared my throat and ate more of my food before answering her question. I think drinks are better simple. Water's a good choice.
Really? I expected something fancier.
The girl laughed before she was cut off from the bell, indicating that lunch was over.
Oh!
She frowned and collected her belongings from my desk, smiling at me.
We'll see you later then, Emoji!
I only blinked at her, quickly shoving the rest of my food into my mouth and drowning it with my water as I watched her go to her desk. What a strange girl. I was curious as to what went on in that head of hers, if anything at all. There must have been something that attracted her to me, but I couldn't think as to what it could have been. I sighed and put away my lunchbox, rubbing the side of my mouth with the back of my hand. What a strange girl indeed. I wasn't the fittest person I knew. I didn't really exercise or work out. In fact, the closest I got to that was walking to and from school every day, but I didn't really feel like that counted. Most people did that. Either way, I wasn't a fan of gym class. All it did was wear me out. I never understood how other people loved it so much. Part of my class was playing volleyball that day, and much to my dismay, I wasn't allowed to sit out. I was, however, able to get into the back row. Thankfully, that left me with close to no responsibility, since the ball would have had to pass everyone in front of me first, and I was pretty confident that the others were better than I was. As the whistle was blown, the opposing team served their ball straight over to us, and one of my teammates hit it back, the few behind him scurrying to his side. My teammates certainly seemed into the game, and if they weren't, they were good at acting like it. I slumped a little and stood with my feet apart and my gaze in front of me. Some other students and classmates were on the sidelines waiting for their turn in line, or dribbling a basketball or something similar. Chattering was mild so as to not get scolded by the teachers, but was still noticeable enough to give the room a nice white noise. The other team hit the ball back, launching it our way at a pretty high speed. It took our team off guard, and we watched as the volleyball hit the ground over the net, bounce, and then roll to the sidelines. Some of my teammates mumbled curses under their breath, while others shrugged, and I just blinked. Well, I guess they gained a point. A whistle was blown, and one of the students retrieved the ball, bringing it back and handing it to the other team. Everyone on our side readied themselves in equal positions, and I tensed a little when the ball was launched our way again. When it was thrusted my way, I flinched, not wanting to try to have to hit it back. Luckily, one of my teammates that was in front of me nabbed it pretty well, sending it up in the air, which gave another one of our teammates time to hit it an additional time. This action sent the ball flying to the opposing team's side. The other team's reflexes were good, though, so we started a game of back and forth with them. None of us were star athletes, so I didn't really think anyone had any super secret plan to score points or anything like that. So it was a pretty boring match, in my opinion. This went on for a little while until one of us scored a point or two. At that point, I had only needed to move a few times, so I was happy. Well, I wouldn't have really moved at all if not for the teacher scolding me for not being a part of the team. Luckily, I'd managed to not break a sweat the whole time, so I hardly cared much. The game was starting to come to an end because of time restraints, and I was feeling thankful for it. I had enough exercise for the year, and that day alone. My team hit the ball over to the other side again, and as they juggled it, I started to hear a familiar voice shouting from the crowd of students on the sidelines. "Emoji!" It rang, loud and encouraging. I looked up, looking for the source of the chanting, getting a little distracted along the way. Someone was calling me by my last name, so it could have been anyone there. I couldn't spot who, though, so I turned back to the game.
Emoji, you can do it!
I tried to ignore the chanting, not wanting to get distracted. Though, I did start to wonder who was calling my name of all things. Hitting the ball back over, my team scored another point, and applause could be heard on the sidelines before we went to serve again.
Go, go, Emoji! Show them what you got! Emoji!
The voice began to have a sing-songy tune to it, sounding even louder, as if the person had cupped their hands around their mouth. I was doing my best to ignore it, hoping no one knew that the emoji person was me, but the longer it went on, the more attention it garnered. Just by glancing, I could see my teammates look around, trying to find whoever it was that was being cheered on. I glared ahead of me, feeling my face heat up. Ugh, this was embarrassing. I wasn't even doing anything, and yet my name was being screamed throughout the entire gym. A couple of my teammates took notice of my different demeanor and even started to chuckle as the chanting continued.
Emoji fight! Fight, fight, emoji!
The sing-songy chanting continued. Lowering my eyebrows and squinting, I took another look around the room before seeing who the cheerleader was. Of course. It was that Kikamura girl again. I should have figured the only one to be yelling that obnoxiously, much less know who I was, had to have been her. The yelling was starting to get on my nerves, so I opened my mouth to yell a mocking cheer back. But suddenly, a ball was slammed right against the side of my face the moment I did so. The force of the impact caused me to stumble backwards and lose my balance, and I fell straight on my behind. Thankfully, the blow wasn't strong enough to throw my head back onto the floor.
Ah, Emoji, you're supposed to fight, not fall!
The voice sounded again. Didn't she think I had known that already? Suddenly, all eyes were on me, the blonde's yell distinguishing who the emoji person she was cheering on was. The right side of my face slowly started to pulse with pain, the adrenaline fading and the area stinging with irritation. God damn it. If she hadn't distracted me. Several students came to my side, as well as a teacher or two, asking if I was all right, concern in their voices. A couple of my teammates pouted, knowing very well that I wasn't paying the least bit of attention to the game, and that's why I had gotten hit in the first place. I looked away and put my hands up, my palms facing outwards in surrenderance. I'm fine. Let's continue our match. I just wanted it to be over already. The situation, the match, the day. I looked back to my team in hopes of getting them all to calm down and see that everything was fine. Murmuring went on between the teams as I helped myself up, refusing any help from the others. I'm sure it came off as rude, but it was embarrassing enough to have Kikamura shouting my name for the last several minutes. To have gotten hurt in the midst of it all? The last thing I wanted was to appear so weak I couldn't even get up on my own. Suddenly, a brunette girl from the opposing team raised her hand and took fault for the situation.
It was my fault. I think I hit it a little too hard,
she offered up, frowning and looking from me to my classmates. No one really objected or gave her a hard time about it, though, talking amongst themselves before the teacher blew their whistle. The situation was starting to become more complicated than it needed to be, so I was thankful he put an end to it. Enough! The game is almost over, so just play without emoji, the teacher announced, clearly annoyed. I was surprised when no arguments were made as to how the other team now had one more member than ours, but I guess since I was no real asset to the team anyway, it didn't make much of a difference. Sighing, I walked off the playing field and sat down at the nearby bleachers, touching the side of my face. Ow. I touched it gently with my fingertips, inspecting it physically to see if perhaps it had left a mark of any kind. I didn't really feel anything though, so that was good. Hearing a shuffling from my side, I watched as Kikamura approached me, concern in her eyes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to...
I cut her off with a glare, standing up quickly and leaving the area. What was this girl's problem? Not only had she invited herself into my class life without permission, but now she was interfering outside of the classroom and giving me unwanted attention with the possibility of starting rumors. I should have told the girl to go away from the beginning. Well, maybe I should have actually enforced the idea. Either way, I was in no mood to have a discussion with her, at least not right then, so I left the gym and excused myself to the bathroom. I walked up to one of the mirrors and glared at my reflection, moving closer to see how pink the side of my face had gotten. A circular line from the roundness of the ball was indented on my cheek, and I traced it with my forefinger. I frowned. My brother was probably going to worry if it left some sort of mark after a few hours. I really hope it wouldn't. Looking back to my face, I tried to soften my expression a bit, but just morphed back into my default emotionless look, which really didn't look a whole lot better than my glare from earlier. Oh well. It's not like it mattered. It was time to head home. Once inside, I noticed how dark and red the sky had become. Once outside, I noticed how dark and red the sky had become. Already, snow had started slowly falling from the sky. I sighed silently to myself. How frustrating. Surely the temperature was going to drop over the night, too. I already felt dread at the thought of my brother having to walk in it while sick. Hopefully he's all right. Since I hadn't received any calls from school, I was sure everything was fine for now. Despite me trying to force some internal logic to my worrying mind, I couldn't help but still do so, in the midst of all my frustration. Today sucks. I began my normal trek to my brother's school, starting by passing through my school's gate. There were a few people crowded around the entrance, so I had to walk around them, which annoyed me a little, but I sighed it off. I'll drink some water. Alright. Oh! One of the people standing by the gate had suddenly spoken up in my direction, approaching me without a moment's delay. Grinning a big toothy smile, the person reached an arm out and grabbed my shoulder. I tensed. It's you! The one kid from the other night! Jolting my pace to a stop, I glared at the unfamiliar man at fault. Did I know this guy? Come on, I cannot mistake that squint glare for anyone else. That and your hair is kind of a no-duh. The strange man winked and pointed to his own head before lowering his arm again. I sighed internally. I wasn't really in the mood to try and figure out who this guy was, but he clearly thought he knew who I was. To be fair, there weren't many redheads in our city or country, so maybe he did know me. Are you not gonna say anything, dude? He pestered after a moment of silence had passed. Who are you again? I grumbled back, pulling my scarf down so I could breathe into the cold air. If I stood there long enough to talk to the man, I'd start to overheat. I continued to look him over, and even though his face was a tad familiar, I couldn't quite place him. He had blue hair, which was peculiar, and a big dumb smile on his face. Was he a customer? Or maybe a student? Either way, he looked disappointed at my question and he slumped. What? Are you serious? Come on! The other night I bumped into you and you looked hella pissed and we both nearly fell on our asses. He trailed off and laughed a little before he placed his hands on his hips and off my person. You commented on my lack of clothing at the time, remember? I mean, I'm wearing shit now, but that's because I'm not running around. And it's freaking cold as hell today. The man's expression was a little laxer now, his fast, hyperactive speech keeping me on edge. Oh, that's right. He must have been the same guy from the other night who bumped into me when I was heading home from work. I didn't remember his hair looking so blue. Weird. Oh, yeah, I remember you now. I mumbled, hoping that would be the end of our conversation. I really wanted to get going, and with how much it was already snowing, I worried it would slow me down further if I waited. I just wanted to... Sorry, I lost my place. I just wanted to avoid being out in the weather, in case the weather got worse. You're in front of a high school, you know. Do you really need to be spouting words like that? I grumbled, referring to his foul language. What? High schoolers aren't children, you know. I'd expect them to hear or say a couple swears from time to time, you goody two-shoes. He teased, smirking at me in the most annoying way. After all that had happened that day, I really had no patience for the obnoxious guy. I don't have to hear this from you, I grumbled, glaring at him before turning to the right down the sidewalk. First, the guy rams into me in the middle of the night, and now he was mocking me in front of my own high school, as if I hadn't had enough shit happen to me in one day already. Honestly, I did not understand why annoying people even existed in our world. Whoa, whoa, whoa! The man quickly walked up beside me, stepping in the way with both of his hands up in defense. No need to be so upset, I was just messing with you, alright? My expression remained unchanged, and I looked away from him. He sounded genuine, but in my opinion, if he cared enough, then he would have left me alone from the start. Our conversation hadn't led anywhere, and I was not in the mood to have idle chatter in the freezing cold with some random stranger. Listen, the only reason I bothered stopping you is because it's really freaking cold, okay? I don't understand how they expect students to get home safely in the cold like this when you guys aren't even allowed to drive. Plus, they expect you guys to keep up a good attendance with the possibility of getting sick is so high with the weather like this. I glared back at him once again, taking a step to the right so as to continue moving forward, since he was just babbling. What I'm saying is... He stopped me once again, his hand on my shoulder. A small laugh escaped his chapped lips. Let me give you a ride. You're going this way, right? He nodded to the direction I was heading. Well, I'm going in that direction too. Let me make all this crap up to you by giving you a ride back home. His expression was practically pleading, a small smile on his lips. But honestly, I really could not have cared less. I hardly knew the guy, and he wanted me to get in his car. It sounded dangerous, really. A strange older man trying to talk people into his car roll outside of a high school. I should probably call the police. Brushing his hands off my shoulders, I turned back to continue walking, looking past him. I have to go pick up my brother from school. I don't want to ride. I spoke flatly, looking back to his eyes before looking past him again, moving forward. I had already wasted enough time letting the man yammer on. I needed to go get my brother before it got any later. The man looked defeated as I passed him by, but I didn't let that stop me. Well, okay, he cleared his throat and tried to perk up in his speech, despite the fact that my back was to him now. Well, I'm working at that auto shop just across the street from here tomorrow, so stop by if you need a ride, okay? I didn't bother responding and just continued to move forward, pulling my scarf back up to my mouth. Why was it that I started to attract such strange people into my life? Did someone curse me recently? I wish I had some way of knowing, but I knew there was no answer to my question. Moments later, I saw a truck pass by and a hand waved out one of its windows. Surely it was that guy. Only he would be stupid enough to drive with the windows down during the winter. With a roll of my eyes, I continued my walk. I didn't even get his name, did I? Chapter 3. Change. I finally arrived at my brother's school, and while his teachers were insistent on saying he wasn't running a fever, he was still feeling ill. So much so, Rena didn't even feel up to walking home, and almost started crying when he asked if I could carry him. Honestly, what could I have said in a situation like that? No, of course not. So lo and behold, I had Rena on my back and both of our backpacks on my arm as I walked us home. My side was cramping a little, and after a while I felt my legs wobble, but I tried not to give it too much thought. Despite the fact that it was cold and I was hungry and exhausted, the way I was feeling was nothing compared to how my brother was feeling, so I toughed through it. Rena even fell asleep on my back a few times, as he'd go limp over the walk, slipping down my back and causing me to readjust him. Whenever I did, he would tense up and hold on tighter until the process repeated itself over again. I really felt bad for him, but luckily, before long, we returned home, and I was able to set the drowsy one on his feet. He was totally drained, and I began to wonder if he got any sleep at all the night before. Do you want me to make you some soup or something? I asked, helping him shed his coat and hang it up. Reedon nodded and slowly followed me into the kitchen. Along the small track, his hand reached up to grab my school sweater, holding onto it with his weak little hand. Once we reached the counter, my brother situated himself into the stool and laid his head down on the countertop, using his arms as a pillow. I didn't want to spend a long time on our meal, so I fixed up something quick and easy. I took a couple of cans of chicken broth out of the fridge and grabbed a bag of noodles and spices from the cabinet. I set the ingredients to boil over the stove and turned to grab the remote to the television to turn on something Reed had liked. Subconsciously, I ended up watching the show I picked with some interest until the soup was done. Maybe it was just to keep my mind busy. I didn't know, but either way it worked. I poured a bowl for Reedna and turned to set it in front of him before realizing he'd fallen asleep on the countertop. I smiled sympathetically. He was snoozing soundlessly and looking so peaceful in the moment. I couldn't bear to wake him. If he was really that tired, I should let him sleep, at least until his actual bedtime came around. Holding the warm bowl of soup in my hands, I grabbed a spoon and began to eat it myself, going around on the other side of the counter to sit and watch some TV next to my sick, sleeping brother. As the hours passed, I kind of expected my parents to come home and put some extra care into their son, but it seemed like they were working late or something. They never said anything in advance. I guess that meant it was up to me to comfort my brother and put him to bed. Nudging his shoulder, I spoke to my brother softly, feeling guilty for waking him, but knowing it had to be done. Reedna, it's getting late. You need to go to your room now, okay? I whispered, leaning forward towards him as he grunted and squirmed. Come here and I'll carry you to your room, okay? You really have to go to bed now. You could tell the young boy was cranky from being awoken, opening a single eye before closing it shut tightly with a big frown. Come on now, I urged him, opening my arms and scooping him up, somewhat against his will. Once he was in my arms, he clung to me tightly, grunting a little more in his exhaustion. I walked down the hallway and up the stairs. Rita didn't make much sound, obvious that he was falling back asleep already. I found no point in asking him to get changed out of his school clothes. He'd only whine about it in his cranky stupor, so I let him be. Once inside his room, I set him down, practically prying his arms from my body. I readjusted the covers and tucked him in, and since his lights remained off, I could see the young one open his eyes to blink a little before rolling over and falling asleep all over again. Good night, Reedna, I spoke softly, closing his door. I couldn't help but sigh once I'd done so, regretting whatever came the next day. If he was running a fever the next morning, I could get him to stay home from school. I wanted that sort of outcome, but if he wasn't running a fever, there was nothing I could do to convince our parents that letting him stay home was the right thing to do. Parents do what's best for their children, right? If he wasn't sick enough to stay home, maybe it'd help build his immune system or something. I went back downstairs to put away the rest of the soup and turned off the television. I then took out my homework from my backpack before remembering Reedna might have had some homework too. Just in case, I opened his backpack and looked, pulling out a couple worksheets. I filled in some of the blanks while imitating his handwriting as best as possible, figuring it was the least I could do. He could finish the rest the next morning while he was eating breakfast. With that, I flipped off the kitchen lights and headed up to my room with my own homework in hand. I headed to bed shortly afterwards and caught as much sleep as I could. I'm gonna take some tea. The next morning was another cold one, and I was sure to check Reedna's temperature shortly after I'd woken him up. Unfortunately, the thermometer read that his temperature was still not high enough to keep him home. A blessing and a curse. My brother didn't seem as tired as the night before, but he was definitely still drained physically. Having a bowl of rice with some vegetables and eggs, the boy slowly ate and stared at his homework instead of the television this time. It needed to be finished one way or another, even if he wasn't in very high spirits about it. I wouldn't be either if I were him. I prepared our lunches as per usual, and one after another, my parents came down, told my brother good luck on getting his homework done, and that he'd be fine at school, despite him saying how ill he felt. I could go into further detail about their discussions, but there was really no need, especially when it kind of frustrated me thinking about it.
Do you think I'll...
My bad. Do you think you'll be okay? I asked him, as I finished packing his lunchbox, putting it inside his backpack. Reedna sniffled a little, coughing again in between breaths. The drained boy shrugged and wrote along his homework sheet, filling in one blank after another before stopping, furrowing his brow at one or two.
I guess. I don't have a choice though, right?
My brother spoke in a defeated tone, biting his bottom lip as tears started to well up in his eyes. My red-headed brother looked up at me and away from his homework.
I'm not running a fever, but it hurts and I'm hot and I don't want to go.
His words were shaky now, and he sniffled as tears started to drip down his hot face. I felt as if my insides were being grabbed by the handful and squeezed. I really didn't want to send him to school, especially not walking all the way there and all the way back. But I had to. Ugh, I felt so guilty. Setting my lunchbox down, I moved around to where he was sitting and wrapped my arms around him, holding the kid tight. I'm so sorry, Reedna. I'm sorry. The feeling inside kept lingering in my gut, and I felt sick to my stomach to do this to him. He was so sad, so pitiful. He really wanted to stay home. Reedna hugged me back, sniffling against my school sweater. I'm sorry, I whispered again, not expecting a response. We stayed like this for a few minutes before I had to look at the time and break it up. Come on, dry up. We have to go before we're late. I wouldn't want to feel bad and get scolded by one of the teachers, right? I tried to take a lighter tone as I moved my hand up to brush away some of his tears. I pat his head and tried to smile his way, and although he didn't smile back, he stopped crying and got ready to go. We'd managed to walk to Reedna's school together just fine, which was great. I made sure to give him more medicine for his lunch break, hoping that would hold him over. I eventually made it to my own school and entered my classroom with my scarf still around my neck because of the chilly air that morning. When I entered, I watched Kikamura quickly stand up from her desk, her chair clattering loudly. Her eyes looked to me immediately, and even though I'd caught her gaze for a moment, I looked away and walked to my seat. Gee, she doesn't have to make it so obvious. Once at my desk, I slumped in my chair and hung my backpack from the back of my seat, as per usual. Speaking of as per usual, Kikamura suddenly appeared at my desk once more, though seemed a little sheepish. It was clear that nothing stopped her from being outgoing, not even her own hesitancy or naivety. We only met a few days prior, and yet she was still persistent on talking to me, despite what happened the day before. I had ignored her after the incident, yet there she was, right in front of me. I grumbled. When was she going to give up?
Amochi.
She spoke quietly. So she spoke surprisingly quiet. Her hands linked into one another in front of everybody, in front of her body. Jeez. She held her own hand as I stared at her discomforted body language. The behavior was certainly out of character, but I felt glad that she at least had a little shame. Kikamura took a deep breath and opened her mouth to speak again.
Listen, I wanted to talk to you about yesterday.
She spoke quietly, as if there was anything to talk about at this point. I wish she would have just taken the other day as a clear indicator that I didn't care for her and left me alone from that point forward. I was going through enough stress as it was, and her being completely obnoxious that day didn't help the way I felt about her at all. I looked up at her, crossing my arms, expecting her to continue speaking. If she didn't make it quick, I was just going to tell her to go away. Maybe I was being a jerk, but I really didn't want to deal with it. If the girl honestly cared about how I felt in terms of our friendship, she'd leave me alone. But that would be assuming she knew anything about me at all. But she didn't. She began to twiddle her thumbs now, no longer looking at me, and instead at her hand. It was as if she was scared or something. It's not like I yelled at her. I sighed, knowing the situation looked a lot worse than it actually was to anybody looking in from the outside. I don't know why you're so friendly with me all the time when we're not even friends. If you want to say something, say it already. I finally spoke, getting tired of hearing her fumble over her words again and again. It was awkward and annoying. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see other students staring at us from their desks, a few of them talking amongst each other. All the extra attention was making me nervous, and feel a little sick. Why did this even happen in the first place? I was over there looking like an asshole, when just a week prior, no one even knew my name, much less knew I existed. Uncrossing my arms, I stopped slumping and looked to her with no change of expression. Please, just spit it out. I just wanted to move past this. The girl opened her mouth to speak.
I want to...
But of course, the teacher had come into class at that point in time, and Kikamura had lost her opportunity to talk. Ushering everyone to get into their seats, the teacher quickly began class, and my thoughts of Kikamura soon floated out the window. Thank God. Speaking of window, that's where I found myself again, staring out the window and into the schoolyard, like there was something actually interesting to see, even though there wasn't. The outside view was just my escape that led to my thoughts, my worries, and my fantasies. Though it probably wasn't the best time for it. I chose to go with the flow and get lost in my tracks again. Time seemed to pass quicker in class like that. Class after class, I did my fill of participation, and then kept looking back to the window, or just spaced out looking in front of me. When lunch time had come up, I was a little disappointed. Lunch period meant I had to tear my mind away from my thoughts and focus on feeding my body. I didn't really want to, but I had to. If one of us had to be strong in the household, it had to be me, even if it was only somewhat physically. Halfway through the lunch period, Kikamura decided to come over to my desk, holding her lunch that she hadn't even touched, despite how much time had passed already. While it was nice to have a quiet meal by myself for the first half, I couldn't help but wonder why the girl hesitated in the first place to decide to eat with me. I figured she'd just blindly walk over and pretend like nothing happened, but I guess that was just me making negative assumptions.
Hi,
she greeted me with a small smile, pulling her chair up and setting her lunch on my desk in front of both of us. She took, once again, a look at my lunch and grinned a little more.
The wieners look like little octopuses,
she giggled, as if she had never seen it before, despite it being fairly common.
I have hamburger today. My dad shipped us some, so I had to include it in my lunch. Hamburger, cheese, mayonnaise, with some diced onion, with lettuce and tomato. I'm used to eating it in a bun, but I wanted to try having it separate.
Maybe my assumption was correct. It looked like Kikamura wasn't too broken up from before, after all. She was rambling like usual and grinning like a goofball. She really is naive, isn't she? I didn't say anything in response and looked to my lunch, which consisted of wieners, scrambled eggs, chives, and green onions. A simple lunch all in all, but with more artistic flair because of how I shaped my food that morning. I had too much on my mind, so I distracted myself with some creativity while preparing lunches. It worked for the most part. Lunch was awkward. I didn't want to speak to my blonde classmate, especially as if everything was fine. She didn't bother to bring up anything aside from her usual rambling. As I sat and ate, eyes on my food, I felt the girl's leg brush against mine. I frowned. Instinctually, I pulled my leg back, and as if on cue, Kikamura decided to break the ice. It was almost as if I was almost finished with my lunch, so I decided to take out my phone just as the blonde decided to speak up.
So, before, I was trying to talk to you about yesterday.
Kikamura spoke, sounding a little tense. You could hear as another bite of hamburger was shoveled into her mouth, and shortly afterwards she opened her mouth to speak again.
I guess I screwed up and...
When I opened my phone, I saw I had a missed call from my brother's school, and I instantly jumped, hitting my knee against the desk. Shit. The action caused the desk to jolt up, jostling the blonde's food and causing her to stop mid-sentence. Oh no. I felt panic arise in me.
Emoji?
She quickly spoke my name, but I didn't say anything in reply, quickly standing up and hitting the desk with my knee again, which made Kikamura grab her food in fear of it spilling.
Listen,
I was no longer listening to a word she said, not paying any mind to how my behavior could be affecting her, only focusing on my cell phone. I have to go, I said quickly, turning around, walking out of the classroom and into the hallway. I picked up speed past the other students there and dashed into the men's restroom while tapping away at my phone. My heart raced as I fumbled with it. When did I miss the call? How long ago was I called? What if something really serious happened? What would I do if I really screwed up by missing the call? My panic began to take over, and I fumbled around my phone and dropped it in the empty sink a couple times in my distress before I finally was able to call school back. My knees shook, and I started to contemplate all the things that could have gone wrong in my absence. What if my brother had a deathly illness? What if he was in the hospital? What if...
Tachi Elementary, this is Akane, the receptionist speaking. How may I be of service?
The woman on the other end spoke, and after a pause of hesitation, I spoke up. Yeah, this is Kishika Mochi, Reedna Zamochi's elder brother. I got a call from you earlier, I replied, taking a shallow breath after speaking my words. I put a hand up in front of me, seeing my hand visibly shake. I'm a mess. When I glanced up at my reflection in the mirror, I couldn't help but cringe look away. I looked sick and pale, not in the same way as Reedna, though.
Ah, yes. We attempted calling your parents, but neither has responded.
Figures.
So, we contacted you instead.
Rita's running a high temperature and nearly collapsed in the hallway earlier. While we don't think it's anything life-threatening, we ask that you or another family member please take him home for both his safety and for the other students. Collapsed? Were they sure he didn't need to go to the hospital? Will you be able to come get Rita? Everything was happening so fast. If only I hadn't made him go this morning. He could be well, or at least not as bad and as uncomfortable. But no, I made him go. I made him go, and I made him walk there in the cold. This was probably all my fault that he was in this shape. If only I'd done things differently. Yes, I'll be there soon, I told the lady on the phone, breaking through my internal thoughts. I said soon, but I didn't even know how soon I'd be able to get there. The thought of Rita being at school, suffering alone, it made me feel like I failed as his older brother. I started to calculate when I'd be able to get him home. It'd take me at least 20 minutes to get there if I ran, and then I'd have to carry him home in the cold, and that'd take a while, and...
Very well. Thank you. We'll see you soon then.
With that, the woman on the other end hung up and left me to worry in the vacancy of the bathroom by myself. What was I going to do? What other options did I have? If neither of my parents picked up their calls or even bothered to call back, that meant I couldn't rely on them. I also didn't know anyone at school who had a car. Hell, I only had one person. I only had one person in the entire school that knew my name, and I'd been ignoring them all day. Ugh. I knew I was freaking out. I knew I was overreacting, but I couldn't help it. Everything was out of my control, and I couldn't stand it. Everything was fine before. Aside from my parents, I had everything taken care of. Rita did as I asked. I made her meals and never had trouble balancing school and my job, and yet this is what I struggled with? I really just didn't know what to do. But wait. I realized something. I do have a solution. I can do this. I left school early, but I didn't care. I even stepped in during the middle of class to go grab my backpack and left without a word. I interrupted the lesson, and I was sure that it would cause people to talk, but so be it. It's not as if the students didn't have enough to talk about with all that had happened already. It didn't matter. I had a brother to take care of, and that was way more important than a bunch of rumors. Once I had all my belongings, I marched out the front door of my high school and went across the street to the auto shop that the blue-haired guy had mentioned. I really didn't like it, but I guess I had to rely on someone else after all, even if they were a complete stranger. Cursing as the cold air hit my skin, I squinted against the wind and continued my walk. I was in such a rush to leave that I hadn't bothered putting on my hat nor my coat, then both of my arms along with my backpack. I only had on my scarf because I'd never removed it. I was sure I looked like a crazy person, walking out of the school coatless while everyone else was still in class, but honestly, as the seconds ticked by, I cared less and less about what others thought of me. Opening the door to the auto shop, my eyes were quick to look around the place, searching for that familiar face and bright blue hair. Unfortunately, all I could see was a couple customers in their seats and a desk receptionist. Leaning my head to the side and peeking over the receptionist from my position at the door, I noticed a back area that was closed off by a door. The door is made of glass, so I could see through it to the other side where the mechanics worked, but I struggled to see the one I was looking for. I frowned a bit. Hopefully he was there that day. The woman at the desk noticed me stare past her, speaking up and looking to me. "Can I help you, sir? Do you have an appointment with a mechanic?" she asked with a sassy tone. What do I say? I don't even know the blue-haired guy's name, and I slumped and felt defeated already. What if he was just in the middle of doing something and in the back and he couldn't help after all? That would have meant that all this would have been for nothing, and I wasted that time that I could have spent running to Rita's school. My eyes dropped down to the floor, and I gripped my belongings tightly out of frustration. No, I don't have a... I need to see someone. He has... I wasn't really thinking straight. What do I say? What do I say now that I was there? How did I phrase things? Did I sound like an idiot? Why was socializing so freaking difficult? I started to think about turning around and leaving. I needed to save as much time as possible. I could just walk or run. I would figure something else out then. And then... Sir, can you speak up, please? I can't understand you. The receptionist spoke in a lower tone, and I found myself looking back at her, my lips pressed tightly together. Do I ask for a man with blue hair? How would I even say that without it sounding weird? You'd probably be the only one there with blue hair, though, right? They ought to know. Taking a deep breath, I opened my mouth once more. Yeah, stop stammering, Kishka, come on. I need to speak with a man. I actually don't know his name, but he has blue hair? The woman looked both relieved, but then quickly annoyed after I spoke up. Oh, yeah, Runaka. She nodded, standing up and pushing some of her brown hair behind her ear. I felt thankful that she knew who I was talking about, and as if on cue, the blue-haired man had approached the glass door, entering the small room behind the receptionist. He was yawning up until the point he saw me, and instead looked surprised. That expression, however, quickly changed to a concerned one once he got a good look at me. I was sure he hadn't expected me to take him up on his offer. I mean, if I were in his shoes, I probably would have thought the same thing. I didn't exactly seem enthusiastic about his offer before. Gotta drink some tea. Okay. Hold on. Goodness. Okay. Better.
Okay.
Hey, he greeted, offering a small smile my way. Turning to the woman, he waved at her to let her know that he had it handled. I'm actually going to go take my lunch break now, he told her before coming up to me and motioning to follow him. Wordlessly, I did, and we both exited the building. Once outside, he spun around and gave me a confused look. Are you okay? You look kind of bad. Hell, you should probably put on your coat before you get sick or something. He laughed a little, but you could tell it was forced. I was kind of surprised he was showing so much concern for me, considering how I had treated him the other day. I was also surprised he could tell how bad a shape I was in, too. Anyway, what's with the change of heart, huh? I took a deep breath and decided to put my coat on, leaving my backpack and hat in my hands before responding. My brother is sick, I said somewhat quietly, eyes looking down at the ground again. I felt embarrassed to admit personal information to someone I didn't even know. I felt so vulnerable. He could just shut me down right then, and then he'd have no reason to feel bad for me. He's really sick, and I need to get him from school, and well, you have a car, so I thought. I grimaced a little at the terrified thoughts in the back of my head. What if he didn't want to help anymore? What if he was screwing with me the whole time? Relying on people. It's scary. However, Runaka was quick to put his hand on me, once more, holding my shoulders and leaning in closely. Where's his school at? I'll take you there and we'll take him home, okay? His grip was strong and he squeezed my shoulders a little. His expression was confident and a small smile curved up at the edge of his lips. Hey, look at me, okay? You're freaking out a little. His half-hearted laugh came again, and you could tell by the sound of his voice that he was worried too. It was hard to maintain eye contact with him looking like that, but I tried my best not to look away. Why was this guy so nice? What did I do to deserve such kindness from a complete stranger? Sorry, I muttered, looking away again and then back at him. I didn't really have any words to offer to him. Come on, let's get in the truck and we'll go pick him up. Renaka let go of my shoulders and tilted his head in the direction of where he had parked. His smile widened a bit, and I wasn't sure if it was for his sake or mine. Can you give me directions? I nodded back in response, and he led me over to a small parking lot off the sidewalk, not far from the initial business. Climbing into the passenger side, I quickly buckled up and set my backpack down on the ground in front of me. It was a little messy in the truck, but nothing worth complaining about. Certainly not then. Runaka started up the engine once he had put on a seatbelt, and he looked to me before clearing his throat. All right, I need you to tell me where I'm going, he said, in his regular chipper tone, leaning forward to turn on the heat. The air hit me, still cold at first, the vehicle not yet having warmed up, and I flinched before looking up at the confident man. All right, Kishka, pull yourself together. You have to help your brother. This is no time to be acting like a child. I was about to enter university already. I took the opportunity to sit up straight and proceeded to give him directions. It didn't take all that long to get to Reed in his school when we were in the man's vehicle, and before I knew it, we had arrived. I'll go get him, I told Runaka, unbuckling my seatbelt and opening the door. Jumping out, I made haste to get to the front doors, opening them and entering the well-heated building. I knew right where the infirmary was, so I headed straight there, not stopping until I reached the room. Sure enough, there Reedna was, balled up in one of the beds with a blanket over him. He was shaking. Once I had entered the room, the nurse inside perked up and smiled upon seeing me. Ah, Kishka, we're glad you're here. She stood up and walked over to a table in the corner of the room where Reedna's belongings laid. She held them to me and I quickly ran over, nodding and picking them up without saying a word. It seemed he pushed himself too hard today and collapsed due to exhaustion. His temperature hasn't risen or declined since we spoke to you last, so I'd keep an eye on him. If his temperature doesn't go down tonight, though, I'd take him to the doctor. He probably just needs to go home and rest for now, the nurse explained. I nodded and put a few of my brother's belongings into his backpack, leaving his coat out. The nurse walked over to Reedna and lightly nudged his shoulder.
Reedna, your big brother's here to take you home.
At the sound of that, almost instantly Reedna perked up and turned around to face us. His face bright red and snot running down his face, the little redhead started to cry. Big brother! He sniffled, scrambling to get out of bed, despite his exhaustion. He came up to me, wrapping his arms around me, and crying bitterly into my coat. My heart ached again, and I patted his back with the hand that held his outside shoes, trying to console him as best as I could. He was sick, but other than crying, he didn't look like he was dying or anything. It's okay, Reedna. I'm here, and we're gonna go home so you can rest up, okay? Put your shoes on, I instructed my little brother, trying to make the whole situation resolve quickly. After a minute or two, Reedna had dried up and took his shoes, putting them on and following suit with his coat as well. Grabbing my hand with his small one, we finally left the school. Reedna didn't ask how I was able to come and get him so quickly, and even when we got into Runaka's truck, the only thing he insisted on was that I sit in the back seat with him. Runaka was quick to move things out from the back seat for us so that Reedna was able to have his wish, even if the ride was only a few minutes. The trip home was silent. Runaka not sure what to say, I guess. I also wasn't interested in saying anything either. Once we'd pulled into our driveway, I gave Reedna the keys and told him to let himself in as I got the rest of our belongings. I sat in the passenger side to Runaka's car with my brother and I's belongings in my hands, not saying anything for a moment. I looked at the blue-haired man, not saying anything at first, but just staring his way for a few moments. Thank you, I spoke earnestly, looking down and repeating it again. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done. You're welcome. He cut me off with a smile, leaning over to pat my shoulder before relaxing back in his seat. Let's just say we're pretty much even, yeah? Huh? I raised an eyebrow. I didn't understand what he meant. At my confusion, Runaka laughed and shrugged. Yeah, well, let's exchange numbers and we'll call it full even, okay? I nearly knocked you off your feet before, so it's only fair I make things better. Plus, if something worse were to happen to that boy and you don't have a ride to the hospital, I'd hate to feel like I could have done something but didn't. Runaka continued to smile, shrugging afterwards. That and maybe we could be friends or something, you know? You seem like a pretty chill guy. I mean, all in all, you did ask a complete stranger who was kind of obnoxious to drive you to go pick up your little brother. He laughed again, before calming his expression, leaning an arm on the steering wheel. But really, you just seem like an honest fellow. A good brother at the very least. A very good brother. Runaka fished his phone out in the midst of his talking. Before I had a moment to protest, he handed it to me and stuck his other hand out, ushering for mine. Oh, sure. I let the words slip from my mouth, feeling my ears warm and a bit of embarrassment. I kind of felt like I was being forced to exchange numbers, but not in a bad way. He wanted to help, and I was in no position to refuse after all that. If things really did get worse, having a way to go to the doctor would ease a lot of my stress. Thank you, I finally uttered in response. Once we exchanged numbers, Runaka marveled at the contact in his phone, grinning and then folding the cellular device back into his pocket. I then gathered my stuff once more and opened the door to leave the truck. Before leaving, though, Runaka spoke up and grinned wildly. Well, see you later then, Kishka. Well, I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when he addressed me by my first name, slumping in response. I see he's not the formal type, then. Yeah, I replied, with an embarrassed nod, and closed the door to his truck before heading up the driveway towards my house. Opening the door, I quickly closed it behind me and removed my shoes before dropping my brother and I's bags to either side of the entryway. I could hear the sound of the man's truck engine revving and driving off moments later from the doorway, and that's when I locked the front door and began my search for Reedna. I checked the kitchen first, but when I saw there was no sign of him there, I walked upstairs and tried his room. He wasn't there either. That boy really knew how to make me worry. Just where did he go? I walked down the hall in the direction of my parents' room when I'd seen a familiar shape from inside my own room. Stopping and glancing in, I saw my brother lying on my bed, still in his coat and already sound asleep. What am I going to do with you? I smiled. I called off work for the rest of the week, and while I felt terrible about it, my work was very understanding. My manager told me it was best I stay home and not to feel guilty since my brother needed me most. I could not have asked for a nicer manager. Along with work, I had to call the school to let them know I wouldn't be there the rest of the week either. They recommended I stop by at some point to pick up my homework, so I planned to do that Saturday, when it was more likely that my brother would be a bit better. Regardless, it didn't mean too much to me since my main concern was my brother, and not my grades. Luckily, as the days passed by, he went from sickly and not eating much to moving around more and gaining more and more energy. Readiness fever started to go away, and he indulged in my meals with excitement once more, which personally made me feel great. Luckily, when my parents came home the day that Reedna was running a high temperature, they did pay a lot more attention. They did pay a little more attention to him, even though he mostly slept. Unfortunately, though, they came to the conclusion that if I were to stay home, there was no point in them staying home from work as well. That meant a majority of the time that he was sick was mostly spent around me, and he hardly saw our parents at all. Sometimes I wonder if he felt lonely, having his own parents pretty much ignore him, even when he was sick. Maybe I saw it differently than him because I was older, and also maybe because I was given more attention when I was his age. Things had changed a lot since then, and I felt as if I weren't there for him, he'd end up being the forgotten child that they gave up on. It made me feel sad. It was Friday, and since Readna's spirits were up, the two of us were sitting in the living room watching some TV programs while sitting on the couch. Spending time with him was pretty important to me, even if he wasn't as sick anymore. We decided on a TV show he enjoyed a lot, and one I certainly didn't mind, so we were plenty entertained. While enjoying that, I was jotting down some ideas for new holiday specials for the cafe. If I was going to be off work for a little bit, I figured I might as well make myself useful. After I wrote down my next idea and its set ingredients, I jumped when hearing our doorbell suddenly ring. Who could possibly be here? Maybe it was one of Reedna's friends, but if so, it'd be pretty dangerous for them to have walked the whole way, with the temperature like it was. 12-year-olds shouldn't be walking in these conditions, most especially if they don't have an important place to be like school or anything. Grunting as I got up from my comfortable spot on the couch, I set my notepad down and headed to the door. I wasn't the kind of guy to dress atrociously when I was home with no plans to go out, but I usually maintained some sort of presentable look just in case. You never know who might show up at your home, whether it be a family member or one of your parents' coworkers. It also felt good to look nice. It sounded a little big-headed, didn't it? I didn't mean for it to come off that way, though. I just didn't think I was particularly unattractive, was all. Anyway, that day I wore one of my turtlenecks paired with some comfortable slacks, with my hair brushed in its usual side-swept style. Nothing fancy, but nothing out of the ordinary either. Whoever it was at the door, I wasn't embarrassed to show myself, so that's what mattered. I didn't bother to look out of the viewfinder and simply opened the door. However, upon doing so, I was shocked. Blinking when I saw who it was, my expression turned to a confused one, and then shortly afterwards a disturbed one from the cold air. In front of me was Kikamura, the girl from school. She was wearing a short coat with a star-patterned scarf, holding a large bag in her arms. So on this page, we have a picture associated with it. So I'm going to bring it up. In just 1 second. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to keep this up for the duration. Ta-da. Okay.
Hiya, Mochi!
She grinned widely, as if immune to the cold gust of wind that had just slapped her side. Stalker, my first response was, before I quickly cleared my throat and invited her in before questioning her. It was cold outside, so it'd be rude if I kept her out there. She shut her eyes and grinned wider at the gesture, stepping inside my home and removing her shoes at the door. Either she was good at ignoring people, or she was just bad at hearing people. I thought for sure she'd at least comment on the stalker bit, but still nothing. Could you really blame me for still being creeped out by it? She was at my house for no explainable reason, and what's the occasion? I asked as she took off her coat and seemingly made herself at home, despite me not knowing why on earth she was there. Let's also not dismiss the fact that our last conversation together wasn't exactly a pleasant one. Keeping up her grin, she held her coat over one arm and her bag in the other.
Well, I knew you were home with your sick little brother, so I figured I'd stop by with all your homework, so you didn't have to come back to get it yourself,
she said, holding up her bag and shaking it a little. You could tell it was pretty full by the way the insides didn't jiggle around a lot. I see. I was going to get it tomorrow, though, I told her, taking your coat to put it in the coat closet, which was on the other side of the staircase. Once hung up, I turned around and jumped when I found her right in front of me again. Why are you following me? I grumbled, frowning bitterly before closing the coat closet. The girl looked embarrassed and she shrugged, taking a couple steps back. As strange as ever. At least she had given me some room to breathe. Because of all the noise we were making, Reedna had peeked his head out from the other room, looking to the unfamiliar guest in our house. You could see the curiosity burning behind his eyes, him staring to me.
Who's this?
He spoke up, moving a hand to brush a couple strands of hair behind his ear, despite the hair just falling back into place. I never really told my brother about silly things that went on at school, so I never once brought up Kikamura before. It was no wonder he was curious. This is Kikamura, my classmate at school. She's here to give me homework, I told my brother, looking to the blonde. She probably won't be here too long, but will you be all right by yourself until then? My brother nodded at me and went back into the living room to finish his show without a complaint. I was thankful. As much as I loved him, I didn't want him to get mixed up in anything between Kikamura and I in case she pressed my buttons again. To be fair though, Kikamura was pretty lucky that Reedna wasn't as sick as before. If that was the case, I would have pushed the fact that he was unwell to get her out of my house quicker. But I needed to be nice. I really hadn't been all that nice lately, and she did come all that way to give me my homework. Turning back to the girl, I shrugged one shoulder towards the stairs. Do you want to go to my room? I asked her, figuring my room would be the best place to collect the schoolwork. That, and since she was a talker, it'd be the best place to keep her loud chattering contained without bothering my brother. The girl nodded with a smile and followed me as I headed up to my room. I'll take a drink of water. Alright, I'm gonna make my picture go away now. Goodbye! Okay. Opening my door for her, I let her walk into my room first. Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. I headed up to my room, luckily not speaking too much at the moment. It was kind of nice to continue to have some silence for the time being, but I knew it wasn't going to last. Opening my door for her, I let her walk into my room first before I flipped on the lights. Almost immediately, she began to look around, taking in her surroundings with curiosity. I didn't think my room was anything that special, but I could say with confidence that it had some nice color theory. My walls were painted a warm brown tone, and my curtains complemented it with a dark burgundy, which also matched my bed sheets. We had hardwood flooring, so it blended well with the other colors in the room. A lot of the furniture I owned, the little I had, were also black. That included my desk, small coffee table, and dresser. I didn't really have a lot of hobbies, so my clutter was minimal.
Mochi, you never fail to surprise me,
the blonde girl said with a nod, setting her bag down on the coffee table that sat in the middle of the room. Flopping down on the floor by the table, she started to unwrap her scarf and set it neatly to her on the floor, looking up at me afterwards. Why is that? I asked, humoring her, even though I really didn't have much of an interest in hearing her explanation. I sat down as well, sitting across from the blonde at the table, looking to the bag and then back to her.
Well, I mean, you're not like a bunch of other guys I know. Your room looks nice and complimenting. Your mom always makes you these cool lunches, and...
She trailed off, obvious that she'd run out of things to point out. Blushing a little, she shrugged.
You're just really interesting.
I kind of felt bad as she spoke. She was over there acting so interested with the nothing I brought to the table, while not even knowing anything about me to begin with. I guess that was my fault for never opening up to her. Oh, thanks, I guess. What I said was completely insincere, but since she didn't have to know that. Oof. Anyway, you came over to give me my homework, right? Straight to business. Kikamura perked up and nodded, opening her bag and fishing out a dark folder, in which she plopped on the table. She placed her bag back on the floor and smiled in my direction. Well, it wasn't a huge folder, but it was stuffed with more than I would have liked. Audibly groaning at the sight of it, I grabbed it regardless and opened it, flipping through the pages inside. Geez, there were even a few personal notes from my teacher on these as well. I frowned even more.
Yeah, we were given a lot these past few days. Luck must not be on your side, huh?
She laughed a little before stopping, noting my focus on the pages of homework. For a few moments, it became quiet in my room as I looked over the pages, pulling a few from the folder to see the bottom of them. It was just a whole lot of junk. I didn't like junk. I also had a bunch of reading to do already, and combined with this huge folder, I was already regretting my choice to stay at home, despite my brother's predicament. But what's done is done. There was no going back. Kikamura spoke up again, and this time I looked up. I was pretty much done looking at the folder of madness that I'd had to face that weekend. The girl looked a little more serious this time, and it kind of surprised me.
I'm sorry for what happened during the volleyball game. I just wanted to cheer you on, you know?
She smiled a little and looked up at me with a sort of pained expression. So we were finally having this conversation, huh? I felt a pit grow in my stomach as I sat there in front of her. I was kind of put on the spot. Considering how she was in my house, I couldn't just ignore her and hope she'd go away that time. The pressure was on. I took a deep breath and looked away from her. I'm not really a fan of stuff like that. I spoke flatly, hands resting on my knees. I was immediately uncomfortable with the situation, but knew I had to keep talking to make her understand my side of things. Having my name yelled, I really don't like being called out like that. I don't really care that I got hit with that stupid ball, but God, this was hard. I glared at my lap. There was no way I could look at her while I was mumbling like that. Anyway, you didn't know. It was kind of rude of me to be angry at you for not knowing something like that. But I'm sure anyone else would be happy to hear someone cheering for them, but I'm not like everyone else. I quietly took a deep breath in and then out, closing my thoughts for the time being. This is a similar feeling to earlier that week with Runaka, the feeling of vulnerability. Kikamura could have called me a weirdo or stupid, and I wouldn't have been able to blame her. It'd probably be easier if she did. At least then she'd leave me alone and I could go back to not existing at school again. Her voice echoed in my bedroom, and I could hear the sound of her adjusting her sitting position on the floor, despite not looking at her. After a moment of silence, she inhaled and began to speak again.
I understand. What I did must have made you feel pretty awkward then, huh?
Kikamura didn't sound as painfully chipper anymore. Her voice was quiet and soft.
I can't really blame you for being upset then.
I looked up at her and saw that she, too, had been staring at her lap while speaking. I felt a little less awkward and relaxed my body. Maybe I wasn't completely weird for having such a hard time with eye contact. Even she seemed to be having trouble. I should probably apologize, though. She may have been pretty naive, but she wasn't a complete idiot, it seemed. I'm sorry. I finally let the words spill from my lips, feeling embarrassed the moment they did. Ugh, so weird. I shouldn't have been so mean to you.
Huh?
Kikamura looked up at me almost immediately, looking baffled.
What? Don't feel bad. I kind of did it to myself, after all. I kind of forced myself on you, and I'm honestly surprised you didn't tell me to screw off immediately. You're really nice.
I was nice? Okay, I take back what I said about this girl not being an idiot. I disagree with that statement 100%. You came all the way here to deliver me my homework, despite how awfully you've been treated. If anyone is kind, it's you. I snapped back, frowning at her. Maybe she just didn't know when to quit, but I couldn't help but feel lucky. How did I manage to meet two people who were so kind to me, despite how mean I was to them? Ugh, maybe I needed to stop being so selfish and try to give that whole friendship thing a try. At the very least, I could stand to not be so rude. It didn't have to mean being close to them or anything, but maybe having a couple people around wouldn't be so bad after all. Jeez, what am I saying? The past few weeks were anything but normal, and as much as I wish for everything to go back to normal, I had a feeling it never would. Maybe I really should accept this already. Kikamura smiled at me, bringing her knees up to her chest and hugging them lightly.
Thank you, Mochi,
she said, her expression brightening once again. I couldn't really return the smile in the same way, seeing as how my demeanor was one of dulled emotions, but I did give her a small grin in return. We sat there for a moment or two without saying anything before Kikamura spoke up once more.
Anyway, I don't want to overstay my welcome, so I'll get going now.
Kikamura beamed, standing up quickly and brushing her skirt down to fold as it should. As she did, I felt a little part inside me jerk, as if to say it didn't want her to leave yet. I hadn't really ever had people over before. I didn't want the visit to end so quickly. I went to open my mouth to speak, standing up when I did, but in the midst of that, I'd hit the edge of the folder and knocked all of my homework off of the table and watched it scatter all over the floor. I frowned at the mess I'd made, feeling a twinge of embarrassment dust my cheeks. The blonde let out a giggle, ignoring my glare that I shot her way.
Are you, by chance, a bit of a klutz emoji?
The girl grinned, moving over to help me collect the pages. At that, I pouted and stared at her with narrow eyes. Well, I was going to treat you to something before you left, but I think I just changed my mind. I grumbled bitterly, mostly for show. Immediately, Kikimura frowned and began to whine.
What? A treat? Wait, I take it back! I take it back!
Her little cheeks puffed up in a pout, and she grabbed the papers out of my hand and proceeded to smack my arm with them.
Amochi, don't leave a girl hanging like this! Come on!
I couldn't help but crack a small smile at her behavior, letting out a snicker before slipping my arm away from her and taking a step back. I shook my head and kept on a smirk. Fine, follow me downstairs and I'll show you how my mom makes all of my lunches. This would be the first time I was cooking for anyone else other than the cafe or my family. It was a little intimidating if I thought about it too much, but also exciting. Huh. There are a lot of changes happening right now, aren't there? And that is the end of chapter 3. Hi, hi.